things. Just to remind everybody that there's a Gulf Council meeting August 20th through the 23rd in Corpus Christi, Texas. It's going to be filled with important agenda items to the Louisiana anglers, most specifically the state management amendment and what appears to be obvious, the desire of NIMS to get federally permitted charter boats out of the state plan. So if you're a federally permitted charter boat in Louisiana, you want to make your voice and position known to the department and to the Gulf Council. Another quick item maybe for the September meeting, if we could get CWD testing protocol for if any hunters want to have their animal tested prior to them processing the meat. I would like to see that on the agenda for September. Also, for the September agenda, if we could have an update on the waterfowl season, the May pond survey, age ratios, and other waterfowl related issues, if we could have September be heavily weighted toward waterfowl, I would appreciate it. There's also a bill in Congress related to the permanent setting of the waterfowl season, that if the department could give us an update on where that is, and we've been working on that. It's got several implications to hunters here in Louisiana, but across Mississippi and all the three flyways. The last thing I'll mention is on the website, if you could get the Wildlife and Fisheries meeting dates and times that have been established, put on the Wildlife and Fisheries website, that would be really beneficial. Having those asks about that. That's it. Thank you.
Commissioner Smitko.
I've referenced with members of administration, and I would like to see a discussion at the next meeting on the agenda regarding the age at which someone can purchase a commercial fishing license. 15, 16, 17-year-olds who work during the summer should be able to get a commercial license. So let's make sure that's on the agenda. Thank you.
Commissioner Censari.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to welcome everyone here to New Orleans. I thank you a lot for having this meeting here, commissioners and the department. It's kind of a big deal to me. The Oyster Commission started here in 1902, and we had our first office on Carondelet Street in downtown New Orleans. And when the New Orleans court building was built and completed in 1910, moved over to 400 Royal Street in the French Quarter, where the current Supreme Court building is today. And it was housed there until it moved to Quail Drive. So this is the first meeting we're having in New Orleans in over 25 years as a commission. And it's really heartwarming to me, and thank you all for attending and being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Any other personal privilege? Seeing none, we're going to move on to the enforcement report for July. Captain Edward Skeena.
For the month of July, there were 19 boating incidents, 17 injuries, 0 fatalities. We issued 844 written citations, 649 written warnings, and 34 public assists. Here's a brief synopsis of some cases that were made last month. In support of Operation Drive, enforcement agents arrested 10 boaters statewide for allegedly driving or operating a vessel while intoxicated from Friday, June 29th to Sunday, July 1st. Operation Dry Water is a joint program involving Wildlife and Fisheries and National Association of State Boating Law Administrators in the United States Coast Guard, which began in 2009. In Louisiana, DWI and the water carries the same penalties and fines as on the road and includes jail time, fines, and loss of driving and or boating operation privileges. Anyone cited for DWI on the water or on the road will lose his or her driver's license. and voting privileges for the specified time ordered by the judge in the case. In addition, each offense of operating a vehicle or vessel while intoxicated counts towards the total number of DWI crimes, whether they happen on the water or on the road. Enforcement agents cited the St. Bernard man for possessing over 20% undersized crabs and possessing immature female crabs and fighting for luxury and blackened parish. Agents stopped the subject to conduct a license and compliance inspection and found him in possession of 3 crates of crabs. Each crate was rated and found to contain more than 10% of undersized crabs. The illegal contents were reported at 24, 30, and 32% undersized. Additionally, 1 crate contained 6% of immature female crabs. 180 pounds of crabs were returned to the water. 3 Colombian men were cited for taking fishing illegally by using a shocking device and fishing without possessing a recreational fishing license in Caldwell Parish. One of the men was also cited for operating an unregistered motorboat and failing to comply with TFE requirements. Agents were investigating complaints of people using a shocking device to land fish on the Washita River near Columbia. Agents set up surveillance of the river and observed the ship subjects with the shocking device. Agents made contact with the 2 men found in possession of catfish and 2 shocking devices. During questioning, the subjects admitted to shocking fish on prior occasions. The agent seized a 14-foot vessel, motor, and several shocking devices. 40 catfish were seized and donated to a local charity. Sir, this concludes the enforcement report.
Thank you, Captain Skinner. At this time, I will take a brief recess for about 5 minutes. We have to meet somebody outside. No, sir. This time, I'm gonna bring the meeting back to order. We have a special guest in our presence. We have Mayor of the great city of New Orleans, Ms. Mayor Cantrell is here this morning. I'd like to say good morning, Mayor Cantrell. My name's Bobby Samani, and I'm the chairman of the Wildlife Fishery Commission, and it's indeed a pleasure to have the mayor of this great city attending our first commission meeting in the Crescent City since 1994. I know I speak for the rest of the commission when I say we're excited that you accepted our invitation to attend this meeting, and it's an honor to have you here. After you address this group, I hope you'll be able to stay for a few minutes to observe how the commission, The Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, along with our end users out here, work together to preserve, protect, and utilize the natural resources of our sportsman's paradise. And right now, I know Secretary Monase would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mayor, and welcome from the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. All 840 members of our family say hello to you. My staff and I join the commission in thanking you for attending today's meeting. I want to point out to you that we have a fellow graduate from Xavier University on our staff, our General Counsel, Yolanda Martin. And by the way, your city is the site of a number of department outreach events that we host or participate in annually. Most recently, we were involved in the Sportsman's Fishing Clinic at the Louisiana Superdome, where our volunteers taught hundreds of young people the rudiments of fishing. Additionally, one of our employees, Danica Williams, and her Wish to Fish program were featured in a recent TV story. Wish to Fish takes special needs children and children from low-income families and communities in New Orleans on fishing trips along the coast. So you see, we are truly invested in New Orleans. Again, your visit really means a lot to my staff, to the department, and certainly to me. And welcome.
Any commissioners would care to speak at this time? Commissioner Sansari.
Mayor Cantrell, on behalf of my family and a native New Orleanian living here my entire life, owner of the oldest oyster company in the United States, located in the French Quarter, I welcome you here. And I can't thank you enough for attending today.
Mayor Cantrell, would you like to say a few words?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the invitation. I do appreciate it. And I have an even greater appreciation for the commission and understanding that really it was started in 1902 and it really became, started with that Oysters Commission, which transcended into the Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries Commission, very strong. And from 1994 to now, even that absence, but not absence, but the presence being here in New Orleans, it really sends a strong message at this point in time in the history of this city, but really how we have made progress in this city in terms of electing this first female mayor. And so I just want to say thank you. It's a sign that we're really moving in the right direction, that New Orleans is in no way forgotten. But the biggest piece about it is how we collectively, throughout the state of Louisiana, thinking regional and understanding that all of us matter, and the partnerships coming together can only get this state where she really needs to be. And knowing that New Orleans is okay, right in the heart of that progress. You know, I had the opportunity right after Hurricane Katrina to be one of the women of the storm. And that was at a time when we were really fighting for offshore royalties, pushing and letting the federal government understand what the state of Louisiana means to the United States of America. And it was at that time that that fight was not only worth it, it's paying real dividends to this state. But what pays the dividends is wildlife and fisheries. We are the sportsman's paradise. And it's not just because. We know what's right here in our state. And you know what I say after going to that first Washington Mardi Gras in January, coming back all fired up. Because you know that's what we transcend on DC collectively and as one voice in one state. And I came back fired up. I said, wow, there's no reason in the world that the state of Louisiana should be at the bottom of anybody's list. Because what we have here in our natural resources and even in our human resources, we should be leading this country. But one thing we know, we're leading it in seafood, we're leading it as it relates to our wildlife. And we will continue to do that and grow and expand because the future of our state depends upon it, but really the economic benefit that it has to our families here in the state, but also that United States of America. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, I thank you, Mr. Secretary. And as your mayor of the city of New Orleans, I am here in partnership. That's it. That's what it's all about. So if I can be of any help, any service, do not hesitate to call upon me, because we truly are in this together. And that's the spirit in which I lead and govern the city of New Orleans. So thank you so much. And our 300th anniversary, back in the city of New Orleans, 24 years later, the way is truly in our front. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Cantrell, for inspiring words. That's great. Okay, gang, we're going to start, return our agenda. We got agenda item number 7 to receive a presentation and on cautioning deer hunters on use of deer urine lures in relation potential spread of chronic wasting disorder. Dr. Jim LaCour, wildlife veterinarian.
All right, let me get this thing loaded up. Good morning, commissioners.
Good morning. What the hell? Agenda item to follow up.
It's what we do. It's what we do.
All right, I was asked to present information on the potential of transmission of chronic wasting disease from white-tailed deer through commercial deer urine lure products. So that's what we'll be talking about today. I appreciate bringing all the press and everybody here. So just a reminder, chronic wasting disease is a neurological disease of white-tailed deer. It's caused by a prion. It also affects other members of the cervid family, elk, moose, red deer, mule deer. So the CWD prion causes the disease is shed through saliva, urine, feces, blood, antler velvet, and of course decomposing carcasses in the landscape. And the prions may be shed years before clinical signs develop. From the time a deer contracts this disease until they start showing signs, is at least 16 months. It can be much, much longer. So they have plenty of time to shed this prion, this infectious particle, long before they exhibit any signs and before they get sick. So the prion is very stable in the environment. It can last for years in the soil. It is very, very resistant to chemical and even thermal degradation. So you have to heat it up to about 1,800 degrees to kill it. You can put it in a surgical autoclave and it will not kill the prion that causes this disease. So bad juju in a nutshell. So commercial deer urine production. This is a product that is usually produced in captive deer facilities. So these deer are put in hens with a floor that's a grate. They urinate, defecate on a steel plate, which funnels the urine down where it can be collected. And that's very important. We'll talk about that just a little bit later. So the urine is just strained, and some will add, yes.
Sorry to interrupt, Jim. Do you know how many facilities we have in Louisiana that are commercial?
I do not. That information is not available. There's no trade organization or standards for that. The urine cannot really be disinfected for this prion, so pasteurization won't work. About all they do is sometimes to add sodium benzoate or other chemicals to it to stabilize the urine to make it shelf stable, but it does nothing to disinfect it. So most producers will commingle urine from multiple animals. Some will commingle urine from multiple farms. And many of the producers throughout the United States are enrolled in some sort of CWD certification program. Remember, these are programs for USDA that actually goes in and tests a portion of these animals for years on end. And that's important, but they never say that they are CWD free. They say they're low risk for CWD. And in fact, in this past year, the most recent year, 5 of the detections of CWD in captive service facilities have been in hens that were enrolled in this federal CWD certification program. So just because you're enrolled doesn't mean you won't get CWD. You may be somewhat less likely to have it. So in an effort to reduce the spread of chronic wasting disease through these commercial deer urine sales, some states have actually implemented bans either on the sale, possession, or the use of natural urine lures. And there's a list of states: Alaska, Arkansas, Arizona, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, Vermont, and Virginia, as well as some of the northern territories, have banned either use, possession, or sale of urine lures. And additionally, the Northeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies strongly encourages its members to ban urine use. Yes, sir.
Dr. LaCour, how many of those states that you just listed are CWD laws? Do you know? I don't ask the unfair question.
Well, no, it's not fair at all. 2 of those states are CWD positive.
So some of those states aren't CWD positive.
Correct.
And that's what-
3 of those states. So this is an industry, once again, which is not regulated. There is no commercial group. There is no government regulation on the production of this urine. The urine, once again, is collected through grapes, which is significant because it allows the urine to commingle with feces and saliva, both of which have a much higher prion concentration than the urine. And there is no rapid test. You can't stick a dipstick in a bottle and say, yes, this one's got a prion, and no, that one doesn't. The only test that is capable of doing that are commercial amplification tests, which are extremely long to run, extremely expensive to test. So they're not really viable as a day-to-day commercial test for these products. And then, if it goes that way, if your urine lure ban would be one more step towards prevention of chronic wasting disease in Louisiana. Now, here's some other options that some of the other states have looked at. There are synthetic deer urine lures that are commercially produced with chemicals that are not natural deer urine. The con to that is you can't really test to see if there is natural deer urine in that product. So it's word of mouth. There is no industry standard, no government control over these programs, and the money checks. You can only allow the use of deer urine produced in the state. Extremely hard to enforce. Dumping on supply and coming into the state and tracking supply would be extremely hard to do. Only allow deer urine lures produced in states where CWD has not been detected. And once again, if you remember our initial comment, CWD can be shed long before it's detected, and even enrolled in a CWD certification program that does not ensure that the prion is not present, or that facility may not be positive for CWD at any time. So we have new CWD cases found every year in low-risk facilities. Something new on the horizon, I have this in your packets. Congressman Ralph Abraham introduced a bill to the Congress, and it passed. It would commission the National Academy of Sciences or other universities or other institutions to perform a really intense study on chronic wasting disease. There is a lot that is still unknown about this disease in white-tailed deer. Is urine really highly contagious to deer? We don't know that. We do know that the prion is in urine, but is it highly contagious? We don't know. What is the infectious dose for deer? We really don't know that. So he has a bill set forth that would look at many of these issues. He has also put a time limit on there that they should have some results from these studies within 6 months if this bill is funded. So that's very exciting news for those of us who work in the CWD circles, just because there's some of the gray areas. The study could shed new light on transmission through urine. Through extensive literature searches, we don't have any information on that to speak of. The best information we have is on a hamster study, which a hamster is not a deer, they're much smaller. But in that study, it was a very interesting study done in 2010. They actually infected hamsters directly into their brains with chronic wasting disease, let the disease run its full course. At the time that they harvested these animals, it was full-blown chronic wasting disease in hamsters. They went in and did the transmission test on several of the tissues. Now, the infectious dose for hamsters for chronic wasting disease is about 120,000 molecules. Infect a hamster. 1 gram of brain tissue, which is basically the entire brain, the entire brain of a hamster, has 4 billion infectious units. So infectious IU50, so infectious units. So if you put 1 gram of brain tissue out there, and or 8 billion with B hamsters, you can infect that. Urine, on the other hand, straight ones, not commingled with feces or saliva. It would take 1 gallon of urine to infect 1 of 2 hamsters. So that's hamsters now. That's not deer. That information doesn't exist for deer. Common sense would say that people are probably more susceptible because that's the normal species for chronic wasting disease, and that they would probably take a lower dose to catch the disease. But we don't know that. So hopefully, Congressman Abraham's bill will shed some light on that and give some more information that's actually more pertinent to the decisions we have to make every day about CWD. Yes.
Commissioner McPherson.
Right. We know certainly that the highest concentration of the prion is going to be in the central nervous system, in the brain and spinal cord. That's in every species that prions infect, even humans. We have our own prions. But, so we know 100% certainly that carcass importation ban is the Cadillac way to go. You stop that brain and spinal cord from coming into the state. It's probably on a scale of 1 to 10, a 10 in importance to stopping urine use in the state. It's the prion will be more diluted in urine. It certainly won't be the concentration it is in central nervous tissue. So the carcass importation ban is a wonderful job of stopping those parts from coming into the state. Urine, once again, without further information, that bottle on the screen might have 1 billion particles or 1 particle in it. We don't know. We don't have any way to test. Additionally, what is the infectious dose for a deer? It's not 1 particle. In a hamster, it's 120,000 of those particles, but we don't know what it is in deer. So without knowing that, we can't tell how infectious the product is, but certainly less infectious than central nervous tissue.
What concerns me is that the deer during the use gets out there and plays where that comes, it's intended for them to come in contact.
That is correct.
Whereas these other things that we ban, you have to think what was the scenario where you come in contact with them after they were brought back in.
Right.
So that's where I have fear, where my concern is going to get to your nurse, which basically by the intention of this use, you're making it distributed all through the deer brain. And then we outlawed making miles for a while, when we found the Mississippi case. But there, that's only
bringing in urine from states that we know have got the CWD mark.
Yes.
So what is your suggestion out of an abundance of caution? Should this commission go ahead and look at that? I don't think that it's gonna be a big thing to success. There's still alternatives.
Always in the interest of safety, it's best not to bring in any product that we know can harbor chronic wasting disease. Additionally, for urine lures, as you said, it brings you to it, which is important in the fact that they put their nose down and smell it. And if there's any dust particles or what have you, they can pull that freon right into their physical on the plate and get right into the brain. So it's, that is a way to concentrate the potency of that freon.
Commissioner Smith, go.
We know that the natural transmission of wild is through saliva and urine, right?
Saliva, urine, feces, and decomposing carcasses.
But I would assume there's, even with decomposing carcasses, probably prions in the vegetation are transmitted through, let's say, saliva, urine, and animals. So, and they're not replicating in the environment, let's say, in the grass or in the ground where they can live for almost forever, but they're just remaining, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So if we're banning the spinal cord material, the brain, etc., it wouldn't make any sense not to ban them. Secondly, to your knowledge, and I've used these lures in the past, I haven't thought about it in relation to CWD, unfortunately. To your knowledge, have the states with active bans had any problem running afoul of any federal interstate commerce?
No, and the majority of them are actually use bans. So Walmart and the other stores will still have the product on the shelf. It's a field use ban that can't possess or use it, but it's much harder. Perhaps some of the enforcement personnel can tell you more than I can, but it's much harder to ban the commerce part of it, the sale of it, than
Sure.
use of it.
We need to address that federal. As well as regulation of these, what we call factories where they produce. And the last thing, Madam Council, could we take that action administratively, or would it have to be legislative?
It depends on what we're trying to do. We have to have regulation.
I'm sorry, I can't hear
The only way we're able to do it with our regulation is if we have some enabling legislation. So we have to have the legislation first if we're going to take up an action administratively.
well, perhaps we can work on that. I wanted to be in favor of at least having a use ban. And perhaps Congressman Abramson would be interested in taking this fight further on in federal government.
Right.
Point of information, Yolanda. Remind me of the ban on the importation of deer, and ban on the deer farm. I thought the commission took action prior to the legislature.
I'm going to yield to Assistant Secretary.
But firstly, in light of the discussion that we're having, the legislation gives the commission the broad authority to do that. So, the ban that was put in place, the carcass ban that was put in place a couple years ago, we have that legislative authority through Title 56. So if the commission desires to take this action up, it would be something that we could put on the agenda for consideration in the future.
Well, I'd like to hear if y'all have any concerns, Mr. Secretary, but I suggested that we've got time to do it between now and hunting season. But the way I feel about it, if we don't take some action, it's kind of telling the public, even if we do a press release telling be cautious, or you might want to consider this. If we don't take action, then they say, well, there's no real danger, there's no real fear, there's nothing to be concerned with, and therefore they continue to use it, relying upon our inaction. Whereas if we take action, most deer hunters, if you've got a deer lease out there, the thing you're the most scared of is having CWD around your lease. And I think by us taking action, it won't be as much as an enforcement problem as we would be concerned with, because I think by virtue of that action, deer hunters are gonna get a strong message that this is a real potential danger, and y'all are not be putting stuff out the woods. And I think we'll have good results of it. I guess what I'm asking for is, y'all have any problems? Do y'all see any concerns that we need to be aware of?
Commissioner, no, we don't. And if it's the desire of the commission to proceed forward with that, we can certainly put that and do what we have to do here to bring that to where you have an opportunity to vote on it. Okay.
Well, I hope that we'll go away from this meeting with a press release that'll state the dangers, potential dangers of distributing deer urine, and the fact that the commission is considering a ban at a subsequent meeting.
We'll do that. Okay.
I'm not worried about Walmart, but I am worried about the mom and pop stores that may or may not have gotten their supplies yet and have to be trying to do something.
Commissioner Corbett.
Mr. Chairman, perhaps Secretary Myers here, Assistant Secretary Myers, we start the season setting process for the 2019-2020 season in January. And we have a series of public meetings and probably 4 commission meetings with the voice their advocacy or opposition to what we plan on doing. Something to consider would be, or certainly for that process, that this be included in that, so we have ample opportunities for folks to provide their thoughts and comments. Maybe just consider that when you guys are developing. I don't have a position right now whether I'd want to see it happen prior to the 2018-2019 season, or have it included in regulations for 19-20. Just let's keep that in mind, that some folks are going to have some thoughts on this, and we want to give them ample opportunity to share it. I have one more comment.
Commissioner Corbett.
Perhaps Dr. LaCour or Secretary Monte or Assistant Secretary Myers, at an upcoming commission meeting, can we get perhaps USDA or Department of Ag and Forestry to share with us their regulations as it relates to captive cervid pens, or if there's a facility that exists that is collecting deer urine for at some point, we should hear from that group who has oversight of this issue on captive cervids to see what they're doing, what their programs look like, so we can see if there's any kind of overlay or crossing over. But what those guys do matters to us and to the wild population of deer hunters. So at some point, in the next few months, if we could ask those guys to come
I'm
and
going
give
to
us
reach out to the Commission about Agriculture and ask him to come give us an update. Jim, you know exactly what we're asking for.
Yes, sir.
You can draft something up for me, I'll forward it to him, and we'll certainly get it lined up within the next.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Anything else, Dr. LaCour? Commissioner Censari.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask the commission if they would be willing to request that we write a letter in support of House Resolution 6272 from Representative Abraham, and so that we can go on record as a commission and a department so that they can go forward to possibly get funding.
Is that a motion?
I'd like to do that in the form of a motion.
Can we do that, Ms. Martin? Or we need to amend the agenda, take that and then take this action?
Here's the deal. It's not on the agenda, and it wasn't on there as an agenda item, and we routinely do this, but because this issue is the type of issue that it is, I guess it may be okay to relax the rules, but we can't just add an agenda item to circumvent the open meetings laws. So it wasn't on the agenda, we did give the public, a notice to comment on this item, but it is something that is,
We can move to amend with unanimous vote and take action.
you can, and also under that rule, the last line in that section that says, under the amendment of the agenda, you can't just do it to circumvent the open meetings law. It should be on there.
I move to amend the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion to amend the agenda by Commissioner Smitko, second by Commissioner Corville. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Let's reflect that unanimous.
Let the record reflect that it was unanimous. Second. No,
I move to amend the agenda to add an agenda item which would allow the commission to vote to send a letter of support from the department to all members of Congress regarding Congressman Abraham's bill to fund further CWS spending as Commissioner Sunseri has requested.
that's your motion.
That's my motion.
Okay.
Then we need to vote again on the motion.
Yes, well, let's clear it up. Yes, and a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? It carries. Okay.
Now the amendment is,
Do we have
now
to
the
open
agenda's
it up?
amended, now you need to make the motion.
But, just a question, do we need to ask for any, from the public comment?
Public comment.
Okay,
Public comment, anybody?
Make the motion.
Make your motion first.
okay.
I'm confused.
Again, I'd like to make a motion that, we request the department to write a letter, to, Congressman Abraham, that he can forward on to the rest of Congress, supporting House Resolution 6272.
A motion by Commissioner Sunseri, second by Commissioner Smitko. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Oh, public comment, forgot. We have any comment from the public on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay. That's it on that. Okay, now we'll go to agenda item. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you.
All right. Got me confused for a second. Agenda item number 8, to receive and consideration a declaration of emergency setting the 2018 fall inshore shrimp season. Peyton Cagle, marine fisheries biologist.
Good morning, Chairman, Commission members, thanks for having me here.
Good morning.
Today I'll be presenting data pertaining to the declaration of emergency for opening the fall inshore shrimp season. To get started, a little bit of information from 2017 season, showing white shrimp landings in the white color with brown, and sea bottoms that you can see barely, that's in red. Pretty much you can see our spikes of what we normally see. This is kind of typical. We got May with the opening of brown shrimp, and then also we got spikes in August, October, and November. This is our white shrimp by count size. Obviously, you can see 2015, we had a lot more larger shrimp compared to last year, but landings last year were about 5 million pounds more compared to 2015 for white shrimp. Here is our 2017 white shrimp landings and values by basin. Pretty much you can see the majority of white shrimp landings come from the Terrebonne Basin with Barataria second. And this is typical from what we've seen historically. Now to get into recent data. So with Pontchartrain starting out, this data was all collected last week. On top, we have our 16-foot trawl data for white shrimp, catch per unit effort. You can see the red line, that's our roughly a 10-year average for CPUE. You can see that currently we're well above that for Pontchartrain. And on the bottom, we also have the average sizes compared to the 10-year average. And we're right on par with what we saw last year as far as the size. And last year we were on August 14th. This here for Pontchartrain also, this is the current size frequency. Pretty much just shows you the size structure by percent of what's currently there. And at the time we took the samples, you see the majority of the samples were right around that 300, 400 count, which will progress to the bottom chart here, which shows you our crossover. The black line, that's our 100 count, with the red one being a 50 count. And you can see that the data actually shows that we cross over on August 6th, roughly. It's a little bit before that, but because the commission did not meet until today, by law, we could not open until the 6th. So the earliest crossover date would be the 6th. We go on to Barataria. You can see the CPUE again here, well above what we've seen over the 10-year average. The size, we're a little bit down. So you'll see here in the next slide, this size frequency, it shows you the nice recruit that we just recently got. And you can see in the smaller size shrimp, that's roughly 40% of this shrimp we caught throughout that basin were smaller size, which pushed our crossover date for Barataria alone to August 20th. But you also see, because those recruits are so many of that same size, you see how that 50 count line is right there beside the 100 count. Terrebonne. So Terrebonne, we got a little bit higher CPUE than what we saw last year. We're still under the 10-year average here, which is not true 10-year average, just because samples might have been due to breakdowns or boat trouble or things like that. We might have missed a year on this exact work week. So, but you can see compared to the average of those roughly 7, 8 years, that we're a little bit higher than last year, but below that average. And average shrimp size, a little bit under also for Terrebonne. And you can see here our size frequency. We got a nice distribution here between two sizes. So you see we were running good sizes, 50, 60s here, 60, 70s. And then we got a nice recruit in there that brought up our small size shrimp. And looking at the crossover, same thing here. We had an early crossover, roughly the 30th of July, the 1st of August, but because we can't open before we, you guys set the date, that pushes our earliest crossover date on the 6th. Vermilion area, again, CPUE slightly below what we saw from our average, but I'm sorry, the dates are a little off there, but the furthest right is 2018, but we're a little below the average there, but we're higher than last year. And then you got our 2018 average size. We're right on par with what our average size is. This is size frequency. You see right now with Vermilion, we got a nice distribution of mid-sized white shrimp with some smaller ones coming up. And again, Vermilion, the crossover date, we pretty much passed it already, but again, August 6th would be the earliest it could do. Calcasieu, with Calcasieu CPUE, it's actually higher than it's been in a long time. And we're currently got a lot of small shrimp in, and you're gonna see with our size frequency here, the high percent of small shrimp that we got. And those new recruits actually pushed that crossover date to August 25th, which that would be, I believe, a Saturday. So the crossover date would roughly be the 27th. So this is state right here by basin, and I put in red here the actual dates of the actual crossover, and that shows you the percent in white of what would be 100 count or larger, and then in yellow, that's the percent of 50 count or larger. So if we open on the 6th for Terrebonne, you see we're below 20%, that's gonna be 50 count or bigger. And the other basins, Terrebonne, everything's kind of close in size there. But again, Pontchartrain right at 20%. 50 count or bigger. So we'll be opening on fairly small shrimp if we stick to these dates. So what I did is I put together a statewide. We like to try to open white shrimp the fall season if we can statewide. It causes less disturbance throughout all the basins. It spreads the boats out. Everybody gets to fish. Well, you can see statewide when we put it all together, there's way more small shrimp than there is larger shrimp. And so what I went to next is I pulled out Calcasieu, because you saw Calcasieu had that opening, that crossover date of the 25th. And once I did that, that pushed all of our sizes a little bit larger. And you'll see here with our actual crossover, with the top is the crossover, I added a 25 count. That way you guys would get a picture of the larger size shrimp. So the top one is all basins combined, which had us a crossover of the 17th to get 50% at 100. And you can see we're roughly 30% at 50 count or larger. Now, when we do statewide and pulled out Calcasieu, that moved our date forward to the 9th or 10th. But of course, we would push that to the Monday rather than opening on a Friday or Saturday. So the 13th is what we would be looking at for statewide without Calcasieu. That puts us above the 50% mark at 100 count, and it really bumps up our 50 count or larger size shrimp also. So doing what we just talked about there, which would be to do a statewide without Calcasieu on the 13th. This is your percentage. So for Pontchartrain, you see we're almost at 40% at 50 count or larger. And for Barataria, we would have 40% at 50 count or larger, and 46 for Terrebonne, 56 for Vermilion. And Calcasieu would obviously, because the crossover date was the 27th, we could not open that together. So opening on it on the actual crossover date, we're looking at roughly a quarter of the white shrimp at 50 count or bigger. Just to show you the tide gauge here for Barataria Pass. If we did do an opening statewide on the 13th, you can see that we're actually coming up to a slack tide, and that's mostly preferred in the industry to open on slack tides rather than right in the middle of a very large tide if we pushed on the 6th. So our department's recommendation, that would be to open from the Mississippi-Louisiana state line westward to the Atchafalaya, and we would recommend opening that at 6 p.m. on August 13th. And then from the Atchafalaya westward to Freshwater Bayou, that would also open on the 13th, but 6 a.m. And that's because they have a law that they cannot shrimp at night. And then from Freshwater Bayou westward to the Louisiana-Texas line, that would open 6 a.m. on the earliest date that it could, which would be August 27th. Any questions?
Mr. Cagle, I have one question. What's your recommendation on the 13th? Is there any kind of way to know if there'd be a fair percentage of 21s or larger, like for retailable sizes? Because some of these fishermen actually depend a lot on the retail sale. On that date, is that something that we can know that they don't have there?
Yeah, so one of the things we had, like right here on it, you can see that the blue line is the 25 count. So if we opened on the 13th, you actually see that statewide without Calcasieu, we're right around 10%. The difference is, as of right now, the Texas season's still running. They were catching a good bit of larger size shrimp. Those larger size shrimp are going to be brought in soon. So opening up right around 40, 50s, 30, 40 count shrimp, that fits us into the market. That doesn't flood the market of the 21, 25, 16, 20s. But we will still have a large enough percent for people to retail, for them to sell, and even for the buyers to get.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioners have any questions? Commissioner Smith, go.
We talked very briefly, I think Terrebonne's ready,
Yes, ma'am.
but especially because of the tide coming.
Mhm.
I mean, we're gonna end up with slack period when we open. But I understand, in speaking to a lot of commercial fishermen, they're fine with the 13th because we don't want to open one area without the other.
Yes, ma'am.
My real question, what's the recruitment look like, Peyton?
Well, the recruitment for Terrebonne, by itself,
To me, it looked good, but.
yeah, it
I want
did.
your
It actually
opinion.
looked good. Anytime that we see that second wave come up, while we still have a large percent of our shrimp that's in that larger class, that's good. That's what we're going to see extend that season. And people are going to be able to work on those larger shrimp you're seeing there. I mean, this was last week. We're not opening for another 2 weeks. So this is going to be 3 weeks of growth that you're going to see on everything that's on that size frequency.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
all of those shrimp are going to progress over, and you're going to be able to open up with the larger shrimp, and you're still going to have some smaller shrimp coming up.
The 330 to 440s, how long does it take them to get to, let's say, 100 count?
I don't have that with me,
Just
but
rough.
I mean, let me see, we had one of them that showed that, I believe. So, well,
I didn't
so
see
you
it,
were,
but-
yeah, you roughly jump 10 millimeters in a week. So the millimeters actually jump. If I had my computer hooked up, I could have told you where we're at. And in roughly 3 weeks, once we go 30 millimeters where that's going to put us, it's probably going to put that peak shifted over more to the 80, 90, 70, 80 mark.
Okay. All right, so banning, I don't even want to say the word, banning those things,
Don't
those
say it.
weather systems that happen this time of year, we should be okay.
Yes, ma'am. And one reason of continuing to push back is we see that there's basins that are ready now, and we're delaying them already to get to the 13th to where we could get more basins open together. So that's the important thing to remember is we're already delaying, as a lot of people always say, let's delay it. So we're already doing that for some basins by 13 days, and to get more of a statewide open, keep everybody spread out.
Thank you so much, Peyton.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Corbill.
Colonel Martin, do you have any concern about AM and PM? I mean, you're good with all that as far as enforcement goes? I know that there's, okay.
Commissioner Smitko.
Since we're delaying the opening, and I have some videos that folks are bright enough to post on Facebook as they're out there, there are plenty of shrimp out there, and folks are bootlegging. So since we're delaying the opening, Colonel Martin, certainly we need to pay special attention to the folks who are violating the law.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Thank you. All right.
Any other questions or comments from the commissioners? Okay, well, we're gonna ask for public comment. First court I have is George Barisic. State your name and address. And all that good stuff.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you very much for letting me speak. George Barisic from St. Bernard, Louisiana. First, I want to thank the Commission and everybody who's involved in getting that extra 6 days to delay the opening on Zone 1. We actually, the brown shrimp season, I'm sorry. We actually got 2 counts jumped right there. And it didn't help that much price-wise because the price dropped. So, but it did work out better. The 13th looks fair to us because it's a very atypical year. Everything showed up early. So Peyton and I have been in conversations since the season closed. But conversely, we try to keep Mississippi Sound open because Mississippi Sound is its own unique animal. So there was a lot of brown shrimp that could have been harvested. We're going to work on it a little harder next year because them 2630s and 2125 brownies that were in Lake Bourne are now being caught by Cat Island. And the only other thing I request, I would appreciate a 6 a.m. opening rather than a 6 p.m. In our area, it seems to give us more life, more days to work. Once they hit them that first night, it seems like it's scattered everywhere. And I'm asking for myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. Next court I have is Mr. Warren Delacroix, third.
How y'all doing? The Commissioner and Mr. Secretary, I appreciate y'all letting me speak. I'm here representing one part of the commercial fishing industry. We have a marine hardware business here. And as all of y'all well know, brownie season for all the fishermen, for the docks, for everybody, was one of the worst on records. Nobody made any money. A recommendation, talking to a bunch of our customers, and I still fish some part-time shrimp. Would like to see on our area a 13th opening. Like George said, 6 a.m. is fine. But there's something else that might be recommended is if we could go back to the shrimp task force. For the last several years, this has been a constant battle. We have to run to Baton Rouge every time because the commission wants to hold a special meeting. Certain user groups want to open the season early. And that shouldn't be. For years and years, it's been the third Monday in May and the third Monday in August. I think a lot of fishermen would like to go back to that, or at least bring it up for discussion. That way it's set in stone. Nobody's running around like a chicken with their nut cut off, trying to get ready. Or is the season going to open on the early? Is the season going to open late? It's a fixed date like it's always been. And leave it ride. I mean, if the wheel's not broke, don't fix it. That's the way it was for years and years. And I don't understand why we changed it. I understand times change, but maybe we need to look at bringing that back. Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Sinceri.
Mr. Delacroix, I understand your plight. As I did last year in Grand Isle, I would ask that you guys, as a shrimp task force, work with the legislator. If you would like to get something like that set in stone, try to get it set in stone in the legislation so that, it can be done and go work it out in the legislature. And then, that takes it off of the department and the commission's back. I think at one point it was. And I would just make that suggestion, and then hopefully you can get what you want.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, Mr.
Appreciate y'all
Chairman.
letting me speak.
Does the department have any response to that at this time? Okay.
I have,
Commissioner Smickle.
I have a question for Peyton in relation to his comments. What were the volumes for brown shrimp this season?
The data is not finalized yet as far as the quality control process. Preliminary data, I haven't even gotten June. Preliminary data showed that for May, we were about 6 million pounds higher than the previous year.
Okay.
Just for May.
So, all right,
And again, that's preliminary, so those numbers are not finalized. It could
I
go up and down.
understand, because my anecdotal evidence is that people caught a lot of brown shrimp. Once again, we cannot control the price that fishermen get at the dock for the shrimp. If you want to control the price, talk to your people in Washington. You have someone that was elected up there that wants to impose tariffs on everything. Do something about the imports. This is supply and demand. We don't control the price of shrimp. It's supply and demand. The shrimp were there. We make our decisions now based on science and on the biology. If, 100 years ago, if you were sick, they might have stuck a leech on you. So should we continue doing things the way they used to do them? Or should we do things based upon the science that's available to us? I, for one, believe that we're doing the best we can as a commission, setting the seasons based upon the data that our department gathers and gives us. But 6 million pounds over says it was a great season for the ability to catch shrimp. That's what we have some control over, when to go catch them. Price, we have no control over. Thank you.
Any more questions from the commissioners? Thank you, sir. Next card I have is Mr. Charles Robbins. Like to speak? Name and address for the records, please.
Charles Robbins, St. Bernard Parish, commercial fishing for 7 generations. Appreciate y'all letting me speak. We're looking for 13 opening for statewide. Keep the boats scattered out in their own turf. They don't crowd, gives everybody a chance. Also looking for a 6 a.m. opening. A lot of us trawl, we don't skim. We lose that day, and I don't see no difference of opening it up at 6 a.m. in the morning, waiting till dark. For a lot of us, there's a lot of things, issues with the wildlife, with the shrimping. One of the issues is, you talking about imports, you're talking about you control this, and the thing is that sometimes you got to go back to the old ways of fishing if you want to survive in this business. And one of the businesses that if the small shrimp right now is bring that law back to 68 count shrimp, then we can have a market price on our product. That's something that's been when I was a kid for generations before me. It worked then, it should work again now. I understand now, due to, we losing half our coast across the river since I started fishing 40 years ago full time. Across the river started first. They started losing their barrier islands. Them shrimp don't hold in them marshes anymore. And, on the east side of the river, it's like a 10-year difference. Now we losing our coast. Our shrimp don't hold. But, leaving the sound open like they do for us, we appreciate that, because a lot of people don't like us doing it, but we do fish. We don't want to hurt anything. If you're not going to go out there and go try to work, that's up to their decision. But we work that sound, and when the shrimp do flush out, same way across the river, they open the beaches before they open the sound. Well, that gives the chances the shrimp to flush out. You get a piece of that action, that shrimp that don't hold. But I appreciate y'all listening to us, and if y'all get that 6 a.m. open on 13 would be feasible for me personally, plus, give the chance shrimp to grow a little bit bigger than what they are now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next card I have is Mr. Rocky DeChero. Name and address for the records, please.
Good morning, gentlemen of the commission. Rocky DeChero Seafood, Bureau, Louisiana. Well, got a lot of things on my mind, don't want to curse, but thinking about back in April, when I called a special meeting. Now, no offense to you, Bobby, but that was a bad move. And I know you had one of your colleagues want it because of her special interest that we know about. No, I'm not pointing the fingers about nobody. But we know there was a lot of shrimp. There was a lot of shrimp to be caught. Bumper crop of shrimp. Now, I'd like to know how many shrimpers we got in here right now. Put your hands up, please. How many of y'all made a lot of money in the brown shrimp season? Put your hand up. How much
Mr. Chairman.
No, wait a minute.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Commissioner Censari.
We have to stick with.
Mistake. No, it's going to go into the August shrimp season.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. I'd like to stick to
the
agenda item.
It is. It is about.
If we're speaking on this season.
It is about this. It's
Okay,
it's about the mistakes we made going from
Sir,
May to now.
Sir, your position is not to be able to ask questions of the
Okay.
audience. You address us, and that's how the
Okay, that's how I'm
protocol
gonna do it.
is.
I only have 2 minutes. Let me
And
hurry up,
if
please.
We'll give you a little leeway
thank
with
you.
the time. But I mean, please.
I know,
we need to
but look,
keep
we have a
the
lot of
quorum
fishermen who are
the way it's
on
supposed
a very thin line of surviving.
I
and make it-
understand it. I
look,
swear to God.
thank
I
God
understand more
for
than you know.
Thank
More-
God for
more than you know.
2010, because if it wouldn't have been for BP, none of these people would be here right now. And thank God for Transocean and Halliburton checks coming at the end of the year. That's how they're going to make it to May of 2019, not because of the prices. All right, we do know they had an abundance of shrimp in May, but y'all opened it too early. By having a special meeting, the factories that were able to buy, not all were able to buy. The lady from Transocean Harvest was not ready. M&M shut down. CF Galat and Diablo had to shut down. So So the prices got low because y'all ordered a special meeting. 30 cents a pound it dropped. Now, who's the guy that claimed they worked for 40 cents a pound from Lafitte? Can you please put your hand up?
Again,
Okay.
point of order.
All right. That's what happened. It went from 75 cents to 40 cents a pound because of now making an announcement. So your board made a bad move April 30th. We cannot have another bad move ever again. Yeah. Yeah, not that bad. Not that bad. All right, so I got a couple of questions. Now, I know Peyton's been getting coached from George and doing a little better job, but Peyton kind of put off that he was a meteorologist too, predicting more cold fronts to
Okay,
come.
point of order.
And they never did
Asked
come. And they never did
before
come.
that
They never did
individuals
come.
not come here
They never.
and
Wait a minute.
castigate our employees. And I
I'm
don't
not. They never
appreciate
did come. He couldn't. He should have been predicting the
Just
future.
Just give us your
Okay.
opinion on when
So,
you
right,
want
so
the
we cannot
season
have no more
open and closed.
mistakes. So I'm thinking. I need to finish. I'm thinking August 20th, statewide PM. To kind of make the 13th and the 27th in the middle.
Okay, thank you.
That's what I'm thinking.
Next, we have Mr. Barry Rogers.
What did he say I wanted to be against?
Name and address for the record.
Barry Rogers from Houma, Louisiana. Good morning, Mr. Secretary, Commission members. I am total agreement with Peyton's proposal on the 13th, Zone 1, Zone 2. I'm adamantly against any partial zone opening or one zone opening over another. It is an ecological disaster to put every fisherman in Louisiana in one spot at one time. Please keep that into your consideration. It is detrimental to us all. We had a very, very bad May season on prices. We caught shrimp. Everyone's in agreement to that. We made no money. It is imperative that we have an August season. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Warren Guidros Sr. He did not want to speak, but he doesn't have a recommendation. Mr. Guidro? Back. Next card we have is Mr. Troy Schultz. Would you like to speak, sir?
Yes, I mean.
I would like to thank the commission for what y'all did for the brown shrimp, because even though we didn't make a lot of money, we had opportunity to work. And that's all we acted for, it's opportunity to work. You know, in our zone, in zone 2, you know, the shrimp goes out all the time. It's not like zone 1, their shrimp bigger and, you know, we're not concerned. And we like whatever Peyton decide on the 13th. But we would like the 6th, but we'll take the 13th if we have to. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have Mr. Gene Vincent, I think it is. Did not wish to speak, but wanted the 6th. Then we have Mr. Cecil West. Westergate, maybe? He wants August the 6th. We also have Mr. Stephen Alexi. He wanted August the 6th. Mr. Felix Alexi would like August the 6th. Mr. Claudia Helmer missing, I guess. She wants August the 6th.
I'd like to say something.
Huh? You like to speak? Name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Claudia Helmer from Barrett. They would have more pounds of shrimp counted for the May season if they would have bought shrimp. The buyers did not buy shrimp at least from 8 to 10 days. We couldn't go out. Okay? And the August season should be open up at PM. I've been working 38 years with my husband. August season, you don't catch during the day, like you catch at night. Last year, we had one brown shrimp and one white shrimp. That's what we caught for the opening. We went to bed to work the night, and that's when we caught our shrimp. PM. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, we have Mr. Kenneth Guidry. He wanted to open it on the 8th. I think that's what he said. Oh, 8/6, on the 6th at 6 PM. Mr. Kenneth Helmer. He wants it August 6th at 6 PM. Mr. John Alexi, on the 6th, he wanted it open. Didn't have a time. Mr. Troy Schultz Jr., August 6th, latest the 13th. Mr. Troy Zar, he would like to see it open on August the 6th. Mr. Jerry Helmer, would like to see it open August 13th at 6 PM. Mr. Kenneth Bundy would like to see it open on the 13th. Grant Bundy, open on the 13th. Joey Babin, like to see a statewide opening on the 13th. Mr. Terry Picani, wanted to see statewide open on the, I guess that's 13th. 13th. Mr. Gary Mook wanted to see the opening on the 13th. And Mr. Ernest Rutley would like to see the 13th. Mr. Wayne Sheremy would like to see a statewide on the 13th. And Mr. Craig Pisani, statewide on the 13th. We also have Mr. Thomas Celine, got a grant out, statewide the 13th. He wants to speak on 8 and 9, yeah. Mr. Mark Valentino would like to speak.
My name's Mark Valentino. I want to thank the commission for listening to us and expressing our opinion. A lot of people want to open on the 13th, and we tend to agree, although we're the stepchild of, seems like all of the other areas. And we went through, which I'll speak later on the oysters because I wear 2 hats here. Because I have a shrimp and oyster dock in Cameron that's been, had a couple bad seasons, shrimp and oysters. I would like to see it open on the 13th with, the entire coast open. Talking to the wildlife and fisheries, there is a wide variance of sizes in our area, where on the northern end, there is some very small shrimp that will be coming down. But on the south end of where all the shrimp come out. They're larger white shrimp, predominantly almost all white shrimp, that are already at this date are already 3640s and 4050s and even some 3135s. If we wait until the end of the month, we may lose those shrimp. The shrimpers are not going to be working on 8000s. They're going to be working on the biggest shrimp they can on the southern part. Also to add is we're in a unique place where literally everything has to come out through our channel and through the jetties. So if boats want to catch bigger shrimp, they're going to be working on the south end. They're not going to be working on the north end catching the small shrimp. We want to catch the biggest shrimp we can. Opening much later than the rest of the state puts us at a disadvantage. By the time we do open, the market's already glutted, and possibly we're going to get even a lower price for our shrimp. It puts us at a distinct disadvantage always opening later than everyone else. So that's just, I would like to see that they consider opening everything statewide. That way our boats don't have a chance if they don't want to go to the eastern part of the state. It's more spread out and more even, where boats aren't concentrated in one area that's open and one area that's not. And so I just ask that y'all consider, and the Wildlife and Fisheries would consider possibly just opening everything on the 13th, make it an even playing field for all of us. We had a devastating oyster season, and the fishermen of Cameron need to make some money. There's shrimp there now to catch, and we need to make a living. Appreciate it. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Valentino. All right, I have no more cards. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak for the commission on the season, sir?
Yeah, my name's Adley Dyson, and I work with Mr. Valentino.
Yes, sir.
In the spring season, I heard this guy complain that they got 40 cents a pound for shrimp. And they caught a lot, so they made a little money. Time it got to us, we got 25 cents a pound, and there wasn't many shrimp. This is called the Derby effect, where people go to different areas that open at a different time. Opening the shrimp season in different areas is disastrous to the ones that don't have many. Because time we'll get the same thing again. Time it gets to us, the price will drop twice. And, we'll have to compete with that. And I'd appreciate it if you'd open it statewide. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, commissioners, you've heard all the public comment. What is your wishes?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Cagle, could you remind us of that western boundaries and zones just before we?
Yes.
And then I have one other question while you're pulling that up. Is it in state law for that Vermilion Bay area that it has to be a morning open?
I'm not sure it's a state law that it has to be open in the morning, but they cannot fish at night. So the reason that we moved it is because they would have got roughly 2 hours of fishing if we left it at 6 p.m.
That's probably the justification for that 6 a.m. opening in your recommendation.
Yes, sir.
Right. Okay. That's what I thought. They can't fish at night. Basically means, it's got to be an a.m.
Yes.
And you don't feel like the biology to the west supports an opening at the same time?
Unfortunately not. From what I showed you from our size frequency that's available here for Calcasieu, like I said, this data was taken last week. You can clearly see there are some larger size shrimp available, but it's a fraction of the total percent of the shrimp. Also, one other thing to note is, that's 12 days early if we do a statewide on the 13th from the actual crossover date. So biologically, that would not be a recommendation we would make. But we do have one of the options, as was stated by Mr. Valentino, is there's only one exit point. So here's a map of Calcasieu, and this is the ship channel. The yellow line that you see running along the beach and then up, or the red line, that runs up the ship channel, that's the inside-outside line. So the yellow line running directly vertical, that's a measurement of roughly 3 miles. So there's roughly 3 miles of ship channel through the jetties that's available to shrimp now because it's considered offshore waters. So that's open to be fished right now. So to open further up to the inside waters, you know, there's one exit point. So you got 3 miles to fish in Calcasieu right now to get the bigger shrimp that's available.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions, comments? What are your wishes, Commission?
I make a motion.
Just let me ask a question.
Commissioner McPherson.
Hey, I think we heard, 2 or 3 fishermen from the area and a buyer from that area. And there's some logic to what they're saying about the price, you know, and it would, I mean, from what they were saying, they're gonna catch twice as many shrimp for half the money, yeah. Is there any wiggle room there to give them more thing? I don't know the area. I don't understand shrimping and where they congregate, how you differentiate between where small shrimp are gonna be and large shrimp. But it sure seems like it would be good. Even the people that are fishing to the east of them probably would like to have their season open at the same time, so those boats weren't fishing on top of them in the other areas.
So what we did when I showed the presentation and showed the statewide available data, you can see that using Calcasieu and the data, it still left us opening on the 17th, which is 4 days earlier than what we're recommending now. But the issue with doing it statewide is you're still 8 days ahead on Calcasieu by doing that, between the actual crossover date for Calcasieu. So there you see the percent of shrimp on the lower one bump up, so you have larger size shrimp. There's more of them available than on the upper graph because Calcasieu is pushing everything toward the left, towards smaller shrimp, delaying it. I would not recommend opening Calcasieu 8 days before the crossover date because you're going to end up wasting a lot of resource. And like I said, there's 3 miles of ship channel that's available for them to go fish at any time.
Commissioner Censari.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion, if
Yes,
that's
sir.
okay, if none of the other commissioners have anything else to say. I'd like to move that we accept the department's recommendations and move forward with that.
I'll second that.
We got a motion by Commissioner Censari, second by Commissioner Smitko. Any questions, comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is to receive and consider a declaration of emergency setting the 2018 fall. Wait. For the 2018-2019 oyster season on public oyster areas of Louisiana. Ms. Carolina Burke, marine fisheries biologist.
Good morning. Thank you, commissioners, for being here today. Thank you, secretary, and our staff and everybody else for being here. Before I start with the 2018 stock assessment data, I would like to thank the staff.
Mr. Chairman, can we give them a chance to exit as quietly as possible so we can?
All those leaving, please be as quiet as possible.
Should I continue? Okay.
Thank you.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
13.
Oh,
What, do you want to refresh it?
yeah.
Read and open.
The opening's gonna be on the 13th, zones 1 and 2, 6 p.m.
No,
And-
it's 6 p.m. in 1, 6 a.m. in 2, right?
No,
Or
just
wait,
a million.
Tell me,
Just-
refresh
just
my
for-
memory.
I'll let Peyton speak to it.
Yeah.
Well, he might have walked out, but it was 6 p.m. in zones 1 and 2. But that portion in Vermilion Bay was a 6 a.m. opening.
And zone 3 will be the 27th.
A.m.
A.m.
Right?
You want me to pull his presentation up? No?
There he is.
Hey, it's Peyton. Peyton, get back up here.
Refresh us on the recommendation.
Okay, the recommendation as written was for Zone 1 and Zone 2, with the exception of Vermilion at a PM with Vermilion at AM. What we heard from Pontchartrain people to Zone 1 was that they preferred the 13th, but AM.
We
But
we
we
just
already
took
voted.
action.
We
Your
took yours.
recommendation.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Remind us of your recommendation.
So my recommendation was Zone 1, Zone 2, with the exception of Vermilion, would open on the 13th at 6 PM. Vermilion, so from Atchafalaya to Freshwater Bayou, would open the 13th, 6 AM, and the Calcasieu Sabine Mermentau would open the 27th at 6 AM.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Peyton. All right. Are you ready, Ms. Caroline?
Yes,
All
yes.
right.
Well, here you go. Thank you all commissioners again for being here. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and all the staff and everybody else for attending today. I also would like to thank all the staff that was able to, collected the data. This is July 2018 for the oyster stock assessment data from the public seed grounds. So we first just an overview of the Louisiana public seed grounds. The samples were performed in July 2018. We collect a meter square, which is a metal frame, 1 meter square total, and is thrown over the reef, every known reef that we sample in the public seed grounds. We have a total of 106 sample sites. And every sample site, we throw that square randomly in 5 different areas. So we have a total of 530 meter squares collected to produce the stock assessment for 2018. And this map, in this graph, you will see is the historical Louisiana oyster landings based on trip ticket data up to 2017. You can see on the left side, you see pounds of meat in millions. And on the bottom, on the x-axis, you see the years. So over the years, you can see there is a shift from the public seed ground production to the private leases. In black bars, you see the private leases, and the white bars represents the oysters collected from the public seed grounds. You can see in 2017, only 4% came from the public seed grounds, while the private supplied 96%. You can also see from the late 1990s, that started to have a shift between the private and the public oyster production. Here in this graph, we present the stock assessment results, which overall you can see a decline, especially from the late 90s and early 2000s. We are below the long-term average, 91% below the long-term average. And we also had a decrease in production in our resources, decrease of 6% from 2017.
Can I ask a question? The stock assessment is only done on public ground, right?
Correct, only public ground.
Has there ever been a sort of an assessment done on private ground, or it would never even? I'm not an oyster guy, but I've always, there's obviously a major change in availability, or it appears to be public versus private. I was just curious.
Correct.
I don't need an answer today. It's something that kind of struck me.
I'd address that if you want to just learn a little something about
Let's do it. Let's not bog down the meeting.
Okay,
Let's talk after.
Okay.
No, but we, as the state biologists, we do not sample on I believe there are special occasions from swamp samples, which is CPRA data samples that have been done in private leases.
Thank you.
So yes, coming back to the stock assessment, it is still a decrease from 2017, and overall decrease 91% on the long term. which in 2017 was already the lowest stock assessment in the public oyster seed grounds ever. In this graph, the following graph, you can see the difference between market oysters and seed oysters. And the line, it will show you the sack oysters, the market oysters, and the seed oysters. So comparing to last year, we had a decrease of 34% of seed oysters available, an increase of 20% of market oysters, and as I mentioned before, an overall decrease of 6% in the public seed grounds of the state. As just a reminder how we collect and we set our recommendations for the season, we do by coastal study areas, which refer them as CSAs. So CSA 1 North includes Lake Borgne, Mississippi Sound, CSA 1 South between south of the Mr. Go and north of the East Mississippi River, CSA 3 Hackberry Bay, Area 5E Lake Cheyenne and Felicity, Area 5 West includes Sister Lake, Bay Junip, Lake Michon, Area 6, Vermilion Bay, Atchafalaya, and finally Area 7, Calcasieu Lake. So in this graph, you will see basically focus on the colors. So I'm not gonna go through all the numbers. It's a lot of information, but if you see green, it indicates an increase from the 2017 resource in each area, and red indicates the decreases. The availability here is all in barrels. As I mentioned before, there was a decrease of 34% in the seed resource and an increase of 20% of sack market oysters. This graph shows you the overall statewide oyster availability. You can see the black bars represent the seed oysters in the state, in the public seed grounds, and the white bars represent the market oysters. You can see most of the resources are located in Calcasieu at this time, and some between the rest of seed production, seed resources between Sister Lake, Bay Junip, Lake Michon, and Mississippi Sound. Finally, our recommendation for the oyster season for 2018-2019. We are recommending pretty much a statewide opening on October 29th. A one-day bedding season to decrease the harm and the removal of coach material in the public seed grounds. And afterwards, October 30th, we will have a sacking only opening, market size oysters. There will be some areas that will be closed due to the lack of resources. So north of Mr. Go, CSA 1 area, Mississippi River, north of Mr. Go, opening October 29, and afterwards October 30, sacking only. CSA 1 South, which is between Mr. Go and north of Mississippi River, closed. Barataria Bay also closed. Little Lake, Hackberry Bay will be open, also October 29th, one-day bedding season. Lake Tambor, Lake Cheyenne, Lake Felicity, and Deep Lake close. Sister Lake also closed due to we have been managing this area for over 30 years, rotating the seed reservation in that area. So it was open in 2017, and this year we recommend to be closed. Opening Bay Junip and Lake Michon in that area, October 29th. Also Vermilion Bay, Atchafalaya Bay, October 29th, and all of Calcasieu Lake, October 29th. For the limits statewide, except for Calcasieu, we recommend a daily limit of 25 market sacks per vessel, and the possession limit of 50. Possession limit if you fish multiple days. You do have to remember that if you're fishing multiple days, you have to follow protocol for refrigeration and make sure that you tag your sack before you put into refrigeration. Calcasieu Lake, the daily and possession limits, we recommend 10 sacks per vessel and no limit if you have a cargo batting vessel permit. We also recommend that we would be enforcing the no more than 30% of non-living materials allowed in batting loads. That's to decrease the amount of coach that is removed from the oyster seed grounds. And I take any questions?
Yes, ma'am. I have one question before. If the long-term average in the amount of resources is like 91% off, what is the baseline of saying we're not going to fish them this year?
Well, it's a good question. We try to manage using the 10%. We have, we try to control as opening and closure. So by law, we do have to open. So, but we do oyster boarding surveys. So when the fisherman is fishing in the public grounds, our biologists visit the boats and interview each boat at least once a day and get an estimate of how much is being removed. So by there, I'm not sure if I answer your question, but that's how we kind of manage the resource, the few resource that we have.
So it's based on basically what the industry says it's catching.
Yes, during the season, correct.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Cincinnati.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know I have to be missing something. There, are you allowing for harvest for bedding somewhere?
Yes, one-day bedding in all the areas that are open. October 29 will be the bedding day only.
So where they say sacking only?
Is October 30th.
But every one of those areas that say sacking only, you'll be able to bed for one day.
Correct.
And you're going to allow for 30% on non-living material.
No more than 30% of living material. We will also be collecting samples from most boats that we'll be collecting. And we have a protocol of measuring the amount of coach on the oyster, on the load to make that estimate.
Yeah, I 30% is a heck of a lot. You know, I'm sorry. I know what the old law was, and the old law made you cull the oysters before taking seed loads. I think that's part of the problem that you see in this decline, is that it's been continued and it's been going for a very, very long time. If we were going to allow for any one-day opening, I would suggest that it be 15%. And if it were 15%, I would ask the department their ability to think that they could even enforce that 15%, because it just seems difficult. How many vessels do we have? I asked the department.
Yes.
Well, I'm not going to speak in terms of exactly how they will enforce it, but we've had a lot of conversations with Sammy's staff, Caroline and myself, and we've come up with a protocol where we're going to work together on that one-day bedding season to go out and take the samples we need to determine that. So, you know, we recommended 30% based on about 8 years of taking these samples and knowing about the best case scenario without culling of what a bedding boat can do. Now, we've seen bedding boats over these 8 or 9 years we've been taking this data get upwards of 60-70% culch. And y'all probably are aware that we have made moves to close the entire season once we start seeing that. We're hoping with this, we won't have to take those measures in the future. We can start showing each of these boats that are taking too much reef material, exactly what they're doing and exactly what we expect to try to save that coastal material. So when you say 15%, Commissioner, I would support that. I would support whatever number you come up with. And it probably will force some people to cull that seed oyster load. And so, but like I said, the 30% came from just a lot of years of data showing about the best that these boats do under a non-culling situation.
Yeah, and so having said that, because of what's going on and shift in the business and who's actually doing the work, I would suggest that would be one of the changes that I'd recommend to the department's recommendation, that we move that to 15% non-living material allowed. And if any members of the department or commissioners would like, I'll be happy to send you guys information as to why I believe that's what it should be this year, and we may even consider down the line even furthering it.
Commissioner McPherson.
Basically, what you're saying is that they should be culling, and this will force them to cull.
It would make them have to work a little more to go ahead and get seed oysters, what is really considered a seed oyster. And seed oysters from what I was taught growing up was an oyster that was 1.5, 2 inches. And, part of the problem is that shifted to where people started taking reef along, which is, in my opinion, the property of the citizens of the state of Louisiana, and not the property of those particular people that wanted to move it to their own leaseholds. And there's good guys. Don't get me wrong. There are good guys that are very, very conscientious about what they're taking, because they don't want to put things that they're not going to be able to make money on in cultivating oysters. But there are, it's shifted to where the lean is less of those guys than there once were.
Commissioner Corbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support Commissioner Sinceri's move. I mean, the trajectory of our public sea ground is not in a positive direction. So I think anything we can do, because that's an extraction only exercise, right? I mean, we're dependent upon the department to replenish those culture sites for public sea ground. You don't have anybody out of the kindness of their heart taking a bunch of rocks and putting them out there. So I think I'm 100% in favor of where you're heading, Commissioner Sinceri, and even more, because it's an extraction only atmosphere, and as we can see, the trajectory is just getting worse. So if at the time when we make that motion as far as recommendations, I'm 100% behind.
Commissioner Spinko.
In keeping with that, when you see that it's the lowest, 2018 was the lowest stock size ever reported in Louisiana, and most of the reefs were degraded or lost in most of the areas open to seed harvest, I think we need to take drastic action in any way we can, and certainly reduce it to 15% would make sense. So I'm with you on that as well, Commissioner Sinceri.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Sinceri.
The second thing I want to address is the 2-day allowance. I know in the past, having sat on the Louisiana Oyster Task Force for many, many years, the 2-day possession was always a bone of contention with being able to enforce it. And, we have a great enforcement agency, but there are a tremendous amount of people that actually do the harvesting. With 25 sacks, I understand the concern, because if you're going out the Mississippi Sound from behind Hopedale, you're looking at a 4-hour ride, and to make 25 sacks of fuel and deckhands and things is a long time. The only thing that I would suggest, if enforcement believes that they can deal with this issue, I would suggest that we either put in the language of this DOE that there needs to be lots, because I don't think we have any parameters by which, there is anything written, a protocol that you have to deal with so that you know that you're meeting not only the refrigeration requirement, but the day requirement. So that would be the only other suggestion I'd make if we believe we're able to allow for a 2-day harvest.
Colonel Martin?
Yeah, I'll go with that. I think it's referenced within D.
Yes.
That when this is proposed, that's why we recommended, number one, to the top temperature, that they would have to have refrigeration on board if they're going to do multiple days. But to make it even easier for them to enforce, that's why we recommended that prior to them being put into the refrigeration, that they're tagging. Law only requires them to tag once they've landed. They can't, at the end of that day, before they put it in the refrigeration, we want them tagged with the date and everything. That way it would take out that.
Okay, so they have to be tagged
They have to
immediately.
be tagged.
Is that written in here? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, it's.
That's addressed. Thank you very much. And y'all are good with the 2-day? Good.
I have one other question. What was the opinion from the Department of Health and Hospitals going on a 2-day possession limit?
Well, they have to follow the refrigeration rules.
Okay, so you think they would be okay with it?
Yes.
Goes on.
And we do list is the item H on, I believe, the second page of the declaration of the emergency. It does state that they do have to follow the refrigeration rules listed under the Title 51 of the Department of Health.
All right, thank you.
And the last thing has to do with the term for oysters for market is the term market oysters. And I have concern about that, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission and department, because we don't currently have any definition of what a market oyster is. And to put that onus onto our enforcement agents to have to deal with loads of oysters that are supposed to be market oysters, I think we need to address that.
We did add at the declaration of emergency, I believe, paragraph, item number 3 or 4, that does mention that marketable oysters should be no gaping. I don't know exactly the language. I don't have in front of me.
It's number 6.
Okay.
Minimum of 3 inches from hinge to bill.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, it's also in number 5. Number 5 and number 6 speaks to those issues.
Thank you.
And I can read that.
That's perfect. It's addressed in there.
Yep, shall be uncontaminated, sealed and not gaping. And then number 6 is minimum of 3 inches from hinge to bill.
Perfect.
Any other questions from the
I have a
commissioner? Secretary.
For Assistant Secretary Banks, I think Chairman Salmon got at this earlier, but I want to ask you. So as I understand the bedding, that we're going to allow 1 day of opportunity, of effort to go out and get bedding material, get seed oysters and move them to private leases this year. Is that right?
That's correct. That's what we're recommending.
So it's just that one, whatever, it's going to be the day before the season, that day, and you go out and get your seed, and that's the end of it.
That's what we're recommending as of right now.
So the question earlier, I think what Chairman Salmon was getting at is, how close are we, or when do we say, okay, we're not taking any oysters for bedding this year? Is that considering the condition of the stock, is that coming, or are you close to that now?
I think we're there. The trouble I have with completely stopping bedding completely is the way the law is written. It's clear the law contemplates seed harvest, and that's the purpose of these grounds. That's in their name, for one thing, but also it talks about sacking only areas and setting about sacking only areas. So it was clear that the purpose of these grounds was for seed harvest. I believe we are long past the days of trying to, when we should have protected these reefs from seed harvest, but the law is what the law is. And so we want to also recognize the tradition of our industry. Our industry was built on a combination of harvest from public grounds and private leases, and those private leases were supported by seed, partly from the public grounds. And so there's a tradition there in my heart as well to try to maintain some semblance of that seed operation. And we feel like that this is about as much as we can allow in this scenario under the current law and in keeping with tradition. And that's why we recommended only that one day.
Thank you. I appreciate your answer on that. And then a follow-up question is on Calcasieu Lake, is there any seeding practice there?
There is not.
Commissioner Mitko.
Well, if biologically, we've already passed the time when we should have stopped, what do we need to do to stop? But we need to go to the legislature.
Well, I would suggest that that's one way to go about it. And when I say we've passed that time, when I started in 2001 reviewing all the old records, there were 1985, 86 memos from my predecessor to the administration begging to stop the practice of allowing culture material to be taken from the reefs. Mm-hmm. I wrote the same types of memos early in my career. And I've got to give it to Carolina by taking the bold step that she did and fighting so hard for this year, because until now, we've never, well, I take that back. We did a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, start closing the season based on those samples of culch. That was the first step we had ever taken to try to protect that culch. But I believe this is a much more bold step. And I appreciate the support you guys are giving us. But in order to stop seed harvest from the public grounds, I think legislation would be in order.
So we need to individually, or y'all as a department need to try to get some legislation?
Well, we can put that together as part of our legislative package if that's something that the commission wants us to do.
Well, we can put that on our agenda, because that way we don't have to make a recommendation.
Right. Or at least give the commission the authority to absolutely not allow.
Right. One way, and I think we would want legislation that gives us the authority to make a decision based on y'all's findings. I mean, like everything else we do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, but we need to make sure we put it on the agenda to vote on that, so y'all can draft some legislation.
That would be helpful, and we can do
somebody
that.
Friendly.
Yeah, I believe that the commission should be able to put a moratorium on it, so to speak, like 2 years or whatever, at certain public grounds to try to get this built back up.
All right.
You're gonna lose it. They'll take the last oyster out if we keep on, I guess.
Yeah.
Commissioner Corville, you have a question?
No, I'm good. As long as it's on the agenda.
Commissioner McPherson.
At some point.
Maybe Yolanda, what's in the law now that we need, is there something saying that we have to set a season for this? Why do we have to go to the legislature and get their permission? What's in the law currently that keeps us from closing it? There must be something in the law that says that you've got to set a harvest or set a.
Well, it's not quite that clear, Commissioner McPherson, but it does name these areas public oyster seed grounds and seed reservations. And then a separate section of law sets about a framework for declaring certain areas as sacking only. And those two things together, to me, seems to suggest that the purpose of these things are for seed oyster harvest primarily. It also sets about very specific restrictions on market harvest. Yet when you read the part about seed harvest, it takes a lot of those restrictions away. And so I've just looked at those in Globo over my career as the purpose and the tradition of this industry as well. The purpose of those grounds were for seed harvest. And so that's why it's been very difficult for me over the years to just recommend no seed harvest whatsoever. But this is about as close to that as I felt comfortable we could ever get.
So it's not explicit, but it's inferred that there'll be a seed harvest.
That's right. At least to me. Now, Yolanda and legal may have a different take on that, but that's just how we've always operated. That's how I was taught by previous bosses, and we always felt like that we tried to maintain the tradition of those grounds as a source of seed. And and it's hard for me to break from that tradition. I love that industry. I think it's a wonderful industry, and it was built on that kind of an operation. But this is greatly needed because the reefs themselves, and I dove on those reefs for many, many years. Those reefs are in terrible condition. The culture material, terrible condition. In 2008, I did an analysis for every sack of oysters and every barrel of seed that was taken off the public grounds. That represented, if you added all those up that season, represented about 62,000 cubic yards of culture material. So Mother Nature and us had to replace 62,000 cubic yards of culture material just based on the harvest from 2008. Now, 2008 was a good harvest year, but that's the amount of material that comes off of those grounds with the harvest. And we just simply, even in the days of oil spill restoration, just simply don't have the money anymore to replace these reefs and this culture material that's being moved away. And that's why we feel like that taking these measures to start to protect what we have there, rather than just assuming we're going to replace it all the time, is the right way to go. And this is not the only step we've taken. We've taken some other steps, like developing a shell budget model to sort of guide us on how much shell we should allow to be taken off and things like that. So we've taken some steps, but none, I think, more important than where you guys are going today. So I appreciate it.
Commissioner Sinceri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to read an excerpt from 1908 Oyster Commission report. But before I do that, I want to just tell everyone here in the audience and listening online, environmental conditions have changed with everything. We have seen, what we have to do to try to bring more ducks down here. Things have changed. We've known for over 100 years a crevasse in a waterway will cause total destruction of natural reefs. But having said that, man tends to do some things themselves that will that cause concern, and has definitely caused concern to me for a very long time. And with that, I'd like to read this. This is from the third biennial report of the Oyster Commission in 1908. And it says, the system of planting seed oysters derived from the natural bars results in an improvement in the quality of oysters and renders a large proportion of the natural growth fit for market. But it does not materially increase the number of oysters actually produced. The history of all states in which the business of oyster growing has been largely developed, it indicates that demand for seed soon outgrows the natural production, and that the bars from which it is derived soon become more or less depleted. For a state to take the foremost rank in the oyster industry, Louisiana, it is absolutely essential that a considerable number of growers must produce seed either for their own use or for the sale to others who have grounds favorable situated to growing and fattening oysters. A reliance upon the productivity of the natural beds sooner or later results in an embarrassment and an eventual disaster. And that's 110 years ago. So we're here now, and, you know, we have a responsibility as a commission to try to do what we can to protect and to try to conserve and restore this natural resource, because it's a blessed industry. I love it. I mean, I got oyster water, it runs through my bloodstream, but I'd love to see those public grounds come back. I don't know how we're going to do it because of the environment, but we can deal with it this kind of way that we've discussed today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Mr. Sarek. Any other comments from the commissioners? Seeing none, I'm going to public comment. We have Mr. Adley Dyson, Senior.
My name's Adley Dyson Senior. I'm on the State Oyster Task Force. I'm an oyster dealer from Cameron. And we wonder why our limit is so low, considering everyone else has a 25 sack limit, and we have more oysters than the rest of the state. You know, we are back to tongue. It looks like we always get the raw end of the deal, just like our season. And I appreciate the way y'all voted on that. You looked after the resource. You know, opening us later, it is what it is, okay? But let's look after the resource when it can do someone good. It can't be both ways. You know, if you're gonna go by the amount of seafoods in the area, let it be fair. And I think that 10 sack limit is a bit low. I'd like to see it at 15. Because that's entirely too low for what we have. And if you look at the seed population in Calcasieu Lake's really good. You know what seed is? It's next year's oysters. So if we catch every market oyster this year, we still have a lot of seed for next year. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Adley Dyson Jr., I guess.
I'm a Cameron oyster fisherman. We're asking for 15 sacks. And one thing that's not been brought up is Kinder controls the Kinder flood stage controls the season. So we have a lot of closure with that. The reason why we're asking for an extra 5 sacks is because that means the difference between just getting by and making a profit. So we're asking y'all consider a higher sack limit. If you've seen that the data supports that that's possible, so, I mean, we're just asking that y'all consider it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I have Mr. Mark Valentino.
Mark Valentino. I have as I was up here before, I have a dock, shrimp and oyster dock in Cameron. And I would ask can you put the chart up of the amount of oysters in each bay system, that one chart? Can you put it back up? That one, yes. If the commissioners can take a look at the number of seed oysters in each one of the bay systems that they sample, you'll probably know that Lake Calcasieu has a positive 30,484. Is that barrels or sacks? Barrels. And that's barrels. That's not sacks. That's barrels. Okay. We're up 35% from last year just on the seed oysters. On the sack oysters, we're up 58% to 111,700 barrels. Not sacks, barrels. As you can probably notice, that Lake Calcasieu holds about over 60% of the market size oysters in the entire state. I want to point out something that happened last summer. Last summer we had a bill that was imposed on us by the legislature, and there was some talk that that the reefs were devastated by scrapers and that they may not come back for generations. And this bill passed, and it took scrapers away from Lake Calcasieu. 2 months after that was passed, the department gave their stock assessment on Lake Calcasieu to the state task force. And the last year we used scrapers, the year before last, the stock assessment went up 100%. We harvested about 32,000 sacks that year. And there was some concern from the department that maybe we took too many oysters. But evidently we didn't take too many oysters because their next stock assessment was up 100% from the previous year. The amount of pressure, we look back at times when there was a tremendous amount of oysters in Lake Calcasieu. And after Rita, you can see a distinct a decrease in the amount of oysters that are in Lake Calcasieu. Greatly, Patrick and the biologists can tell you, it's not overfishing, it's the barrier islands that protect Big Lake are no longer there. And there's talk about replacing them, and hopefully that will help us. The effort that was back then was in the hundreds of boats. This season, I think the department has records as to how much effort was imposed on a daily basis on the lake, which is probably about 28 to 30 boats daily going out there and tonging. We harvested less than 9,000 sacks of oysters. And in the recommendation, I appreciate that they're raising it from 7 to 10, but it was the state task force that suggested we raise it to 15. The rest of the state is at 25. I actually think that we could raise it to 25, but we're not asking for that. We're asking for just 15. The deal is that 15 sacks at a 30 sack limit is not a lot of money. It's not a lot of money. 7 sacks is just ridiculous. Most people don't want to go out there and work tonging oysters for 7 sacks. But if it was 15 sacks, at least it's enough to make some kind of living. And if you go out there with, it's a vessel limit. So if you go out there with you and a deckhand, 15 sacks, that's only 7.5 sacks a piece. That's not much money. If we raise it from 7 sacks to 10 sacks, which the department is recommending, that's an improvement over last year, but still, we probably still wouldn't harvest 1/3 of the oysters we harvested the year before last, when that year we harvested 32,000 sacks and the stock assessments went up 100%. So if you let us take 15 sacks, we would probably harvest about about 25,000 sacks, less than what we did the year before last when the stock assessments went up. And that's 111,700,000 barrels, which is is there 2 barrels to the sack, Patrick? 2 barrels a sack. That's, huh? Yeah, 2 sacks to the barrel. So that's 223,400 sacks, if I do my math correctly. And so we would only be taking less than 10%, probably 10% of the available oysters are there, and probably only 1%. You look at our comparison. Look at how we compare to the rest of the state. We have a majority of the oysters with the lowest sack limits. I will also, and last thing I'm going to say is, we're one of the only parishes that does not have any leases. So we don't have any relaying. There's no relaying, there's no leases. So our reefs stay the same. We also have, to our advantage, is the northern end of the lake has a tremendous amount of oysters up there that will never ever be harvested unless there's some kind of restoration project that would allow those oysters to be moved to the lower end of the lake. So there's a tremendous amount of seed, oysters, or should we say broodstock, for the rest of the lake. We'll never ever touch those unless there's some kind of restoration thing where we could actually move those. So the state task force was requesting 15 sacks. We please we've had a couple of bad seasons and a really bad shrimp season. And just, I hope that y'all can give us, look in your heart and see that you could give us the 15 sacks. And hey, if next year the stock assessments don't go up as much, look at lowering it back down. But right now we have 2/3 of all the available oysters. We should be allowed to at least catch something closer to what everybody else does. We have most of all of our boats are skiffs. They're not large boats. We have a 3-foot dredge versus well, we don't even have any dredge at all. We don't have any skimmers at all. Now we're only talking with small skiffs. So there's not a fear that other boats are going to come in and do this. So the last of the Mohicans that are left in our fishery need these 15 sacks to be able to make a living. I appreciate y'all's time.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you.
Oh. Made a lot of sense to me. Help me out here. Somebody.
Commissioner Smico, you want?
I'm saying what he said made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Commissioner.
If I can, I'd like to ask the department about their percentage share. What do you like to do as far as, say you have a stock assessment? We see we have 223,000 sacks of oysters. Don't y'all have a percentage that you like to go to as to what you should be harvestable for market?
That's correct. Here, I have the historical graph for Calcasieu Lake resources. As you see, if you compare since 2012, it has been very in decrease compared to the rest of the years. So we did notice that every time we do allow over 10% of the harvest should be harvested, we saw a decrease in the resource. Therefore, we are recommending only 10% of the total resources on market size oysters to be harvested in the area.
Well,
Yes.
isn't there 223,000 sack oysters?
Is 80,000 barrels.
I thought
that was the total. Let me go back to total oysters. So we are looking only at the market size, 81,000.
Is that sack? Is that sack or
Yes.
is that in barrels?
That's in barrels. So
Okay, so it's
160,000.
160.
Yes.
So
we
10% of 160
correct.
would be.
Which the idea behind 10 sacks a day would give them 115 days of a season. So if we do increase to 15 sacks a day, we might have to close the season earlier. So if we do fish an average of 14 boats at the average of 15 sacks a day, it would allow them to fish for 76 days of oyster fishing.
Doesn't the secretary have the authority to close?
Correct.
And with that, isn't that kind of how we manage snapper?
Correct. Another issue with Calcasieu, the east and the west is managed almost separate. The east side of Calcasieu Lake does not have as much resource when compared to the west side. The west side also closes based on LDH, the Department of Health, waters based on the kinder level. When the waters rise at kinder at the river, it closes the west side, leaving Calcasieu, the east side of Calcasieu, that does not have much resource. So we might have to recommend closures throughout the season.
Commissioner McPherson.
If I'm hearing the people right from the commercial business side of it, I would think they would rather have less days to harvest, but be able to get their oysters, because a trip and a day of work that they're not doing something somewhere else is their expense against that limited number of sacks of oysters that they can harvest. So I don't want to ask them sitting in the office, in the audience, but But wouldn't that make sense that they would rather have less days and be able to make fewer trips with less expense to be able to catch the same amount of oysters?
Correct. If that's their recommendation, I think the department can
This ain't
definitely
recreational
recommend,
where you
yes.
want to just go for the fun of it, I don't think. They want to go to the dock.
Commissioner Jacobson.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been focused on this issue for 4 years now, sitting in this seat as a commissioner. Historically, from the industry, they've preferred to have longevity throughout a season and to be able to earn income for as long as possible. That may have changed, but also historically, they chose to go down from 10 sacks to 7, and we've been at 7 for several years. So I heard about this, the State Oyster Task Force talking about 15. The recommendation out of the department was actually 7. It was to remain 7. And the reason that is, in my opinion, is because just 2 years ago, Calcasieu was all red. And we've been focused on this for 4 years, and now it's climbing out, and we're going to go change a major variable by increasing the daily sack limit. I agree with them. I don't think people are going to come from across the state and invade the lake like they did in 09 and 10 and take a bunch of sacks of oysters, because it's harder. It's more effort, and our industry has it that way, and they're now prevent people from coming in there to take oysters. All said, I think that it's a compromise between the department and the industry. If the industry said 15 and we were at 7, to meet at 10 and take a smaller step than a leap to go to 15. Just 1 year after we've seen such great returns, we're seeing improvements from when Calcasieu line was all negative red as well. In addition to that, the days hurt the industry more than anything last year because of the flood events, and the east side was not open. And as I understand, the east side can stay open longer in a flood event than the west side, because the west side's shallower. It closes sooner in a flood event. So the fact that the department has recommended to open 100% of the lake, and so east and west is open, is that it would seem the industry would get it while they can in the west when there's not a flood event, and then move to the east and be able to fish a little longer. I think that's going to increase the days. So that was another compromise I saw from the department and between the department and the industry. So I'm in favor of seeing a smaller step after just short a turn. I certainly hear the concern and think that 10 is better than 7, and I'm willing to go that far.
Thank you. Commissioner McPherson.
There's something in the picture that I don't get. If we're looking at that chart and we see that these different areas, that Calcasieu has 81,000 barrels out of 135 barrels, then Ms. Bork, how do we allow the others to have a 25 sack limit and these folks only have the 10 sack limit? What's the sense of that?
Yes, I would refer that question. That's a historical question. I would refer that to Patrick.
No, that wasn't rhetorical.
She said historical.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I don't know, maybe it was rhetorical. I'll try to answer that as best I can. Calcasieu Lake is from a biological and ecological sense much different than the rest of the state. It's very similar to a Sabine Lake. The oysters, if you go to the east of Calcasieu Lake and into those marshes of Vermilion and Terrebonne and Barataria and those areas, you have populations of oysters that are what we would call more metapopulations. They're not really true populations of animals. They're animals in these certain areas, but they're able to get recruits from all over the place to come in there. If you look at Calcasieu Lake, it is an isolated population of animals, so much so that there's probably even some genetic differences there within those animals. And when you have a small, isolated population of animals, whether it's oysters or anything, you have to be extremely careful with that population, because any kind of major change to it can devastate it. And I think we're seeing that in this situation. If you look back in the old laws when they talked about Calcasieu Lake when they had gone back to tonging. The actual law talked about this kind of thing and about how careful you have to be with Calcasieu Lake and how devastating major overharvest and major environmental change can be. And that's why we're very, very careful with Calcasieu Lake and why the law was always structured to have no more than 25 sacks per day be allowed. And it was because of that just the ecological difference between that population of animals and what you see on the east side of the state. There's also, go back to law, in that the law has never set a limit in those public oyster seed grounds. We started imposing limits 10 or so years ago on the public oyster seed grounds, and it was met with a lot of upset fishermen. But we felt like that was important. We were at 50 last year. We've dropped it all the way to 25 this year. I mean, that's unheard of, and we're in desperate times on the public oyster seed grounds. But I do believe that Calcasieu was so good for so long because the biologists that came before Carolina and myself knew what they had there and how careful they had to be there, and they put it in law never to exceed 25 sacks. And so if you look at the historical data in Calcasieu, those years when it was so good for so long, we were taking about 10% of all the market oysters. And now there's nothing that says that was the only reason it stayed good for so long, but that's at least some data points that we can look at and say when we were taking only 10% or no more than 10% of that harvest, no more than 10% of the total available market oysters each year through harvest, we stayed good. We were in 800 to 1.5 million sacks all the time. And so now we've gotten so low that we're trying to, just like Commissioner Yakusak said, we're trying to climb out of this hole. And we're just very afraid to take any kind of major step at this point that will turn that trajectory back on its head. And so that's where we are with that very low sack limits, partly in law. The east side does not have that sack limit in law, although we've started to impose sack limits over there. And that's why we feel strongly that a very low sack limit is necessary here. And we've felt comfortable compromising up to 10 sacks, but we felt like we wanted to extend the season to 100 and something days rather than 70 days. And that's why we wanted to keep it at 10. But my goal is to try to keep the overall harvest to about 10% of the available market size resource. So if they want to take it in one day, then take it in one day. We just felt like from an industry standpoint, it was better to stretch that season out. So that's where we are.
But that was an awful long answer to a short question. All of these others have a very much smaller harvest in them. And that's what determines the population and all, where the recruitment comes from. And I understand that Calcasieu is a lake. It's not an estuary on the side of the Gulf of Mexico. But how can these other areas be allowed to have 25 sacks when you're still going to limit them, their total harvest, to a percentage of the available oysters?
Well,
is that a correct statement?
It goes back to the metapopulation, true population argument. In the east side of the state, you have a tremendous amount of resource on these private leases that are able to recharge those reefs. So populations or metapopulations like that can withstand a lot of extraction because they've got
on both, you're going to limit it to 10% of the available.
Actually, in the east side, you could allow it to be more than that because of that natural regenerative power of all of those other recruits coming in from everywhere else.
Well, that might be the answer to my question. We're not limiting them to 10%.
We typically, the history on those public grounds in the east has been about 50%, sometimes even more. Now, we've been steadily going down from there recently because we know we've got to put these restrictions on there. But Calcasieu Lake is such, there's not all these leases full of oysters all around the lake that can send these recruits back to these reefs to repopulate them. And so that's why we have to be really careful there and not as careful on the east side.
Cutting you off, but I guess the best we could do and still take the department's guidance is just to give them less days to where we could reduce their cost of harvesting what we think is the harvest or quota that the population there would stand.
Look, that's the way to skin the cat, absolutely. The important thing to us was to try to hold them somewhere around that 10% mark. And one way to skin the cat is to take it all in one day. Another way is to take it in 115 days with less per day. So.
Any more questions?
I'll
Commissioner, yeah.
comment on that too. All of these, the other places where it's 25 sacks, in my experience since I've been here, those typically get closed very quickly throughout the season. They end up being closed when that certain amount is caught. And all I can figure is that the folks fishing there are folks that have other means of income. They can go get those oysters quickly, and then the season's closed on those public sea grounds, and then they go about their businesses doing other things. In Calcasieu, the fleet there depends on catching oysters. And historically, they've liked to catch them for as many days as they can to make their money for as many days as they can throughout. Now, we can't control the flood, but by keeping it at 10, we can draw out longer. They'll give them more days to fish over time. That's been the ask out of the Calcasieu Oyster Task Force till now, and then now it's a little different. But I don't know if you guys are here on behalf of if the task force has met yet, or if y'all are just here on behalf of your businesses.
I talked to most of the members of the Calcasieu Task Force, and I'm on the same task force, and we agree with this. But what you guys don't realize is what they're not telling you. We have more oysters in closed waters than we have in open. There's your brooding stock. It will seed the lake. If you catch every oyster in that lake, it will seed itself because of all the oysters that are in the closed water.
Can I say one thing? Can I say one thing?
Okay, I'll let you.
Is it possible?
Yes, you can go up to the mic. I'm going
Sir, come to the mic.
I'm sorry. Okay. If Patrick can, I think the year before last, we set a season with a seven sack limit. And they said, well, we're only going to open it for a certain period of time. That was the last year that year before last one, with the last time that we could use scrapers. And basically they set a limit, I think, like, what was it, Patrick, like 20-something thousand sacks. And actually they extended it, and I believe we harvested 32,000 bushels of oysters, sacks of oysters, 32,000. This year it was about 8,000. Okay, so my recommendation is why doesn't we have more oysters than we had then? It's gone up 100%, and then went up another 58%. We have a lot more oysters than we had 2 seasons ago. Why not set it at, say, hey, we'll let y'all harvest 32,000 sacks, and when y'all get to the 32,000 sacks, we cut it off. Okay, last year we didn't even harvest 9,000 sacks. And raising the limit from 7 sacks to 10 sacks, okay, well, instead of harvesting 8,000 sacks, we'll harvest 11,000 sacks. It's still like almost just a tiny bit over a third of what we harvested 2 seasons ago. In the last 2 seasons, each year, they've gone up. Also, I would note that one thing has changed in their data, where we're actually getting better data, and I pay a tribute to the concerns that we had to the commission that Patrick took, and they put in some more sampling sites that basically where there's traditionally more oysters, and that has helped our numbers also, because we're actually sampling more sites. We have a lot of oysters, like Leo pointed out. There's probably more oysters in closed waters, especially in North Lake, than there is in anywhere else. There's a tremendous amount of oysters up there, as we know, and those oysters are never touched. So I know it's a long shot, but
I appreciate the 10 sacks, but still it's going to be half of what we did the year before last. I think if you would give us, heck, if you give us 10%, that would be probably, if we got 10% of what is there in market size oysters, that would be double what we harvested last year, 10%. Well, 10 sacks, if we did the same thing in 10 sacks, we'd still be at like 6 or 7% of the available oysters. If you're saying that we only need to take 10%, well, we're asking the fishermen to live on 5 or 6%. So that's all I want to add. Please consider this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any more questions?
No, at the time, I'm ready to make a motion. And I can appreciate all this discussion. I don't pay near as much attention as Commissioner Yakubczak, and I appreciate his efforts in watching that area. I think Calcasieu's going in a nice direction. I'd love to see it continue so that maybe one day we can reach 15 or as much as 25 sacks. But I'm not convinced that we're there yet. We're getting all excited about 1 year. And that's a little bit spooky. And we're also comparing Calcasieu to some of the worst places throughout the rest of the state. I think that you got to be a little cautious in that regard. Comparing Calcasieu to places in the east right now is probably not a fair comparison. So I'm ready to make a motion to support the department's recommendation, but consistent with Commissioner Sinceri, that we go from 30% to 15%.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Commissioner Corville, second by Commissioner Smitco. Any discussion?
I've got discussion on my own motion. I do feel confident that in the event Calcasieu continues to show progress, I'll go on record at this time as saying I would be in favor of continuing this positive shift in trend in opening up the opportunity for folks.
Just one thing,
Commissioner.
just one question. If for some reason we have a flood event or something like that, or something where it's closed for a long time, would there be a consideration down the line to allow the secretary to move that just a little bit?
It's in here. It's in.
I just wanted to ask the question.
And if I'm not mistaken, you guys did that last year. And while we're on that subject, the opening date for Calcasieu, last year we opened November 1st. Is that what's being proposed here? We're opening a little bit early also to give additional opportunity, but it may require refrigeration. Is that accurate?
It's only October 29th, so a couple of days before, yeah.
But by law, we could open earlier, but it would bring in those refrigeration requirements, correct?
Correct.
So I think, again, adding a comment to my motion, I'd like to hear from the Calcasieu task force at some point, for future times, if they wanted to see a season open a little bit earlier, but still have those refrigeration requirements. I don't see where we would be opposed to. I wouldn't be opposed to giving them more days on the front end and get them all the way to the back end to achieve the desired levels. Would be my position moving forward in the future.
We have a motion on the floor, a second. Any more discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is to receive an update on the 2018 recreational red snapper season. Mr. Jason Adrian, Marine Fisheries Biologist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think I can say good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, get right to it. This is an update on our recreational red snapper season. So where we stand right now is, if you'll notice, there's 2 weeks out, last weekend and this coming weekend, since we're not fishing 7 days. So actually that last highlighted week would be what happens this weekend. But we're currently at 71% So 530,000 pounds, a little over. One thing I do want to note, being this deep in the quota as we are now, there could come a point anytime with any of these new groups of landings that the Secretary may have to hit the pause button, let the rest of those landings come in and take a look and see what we have left. Especially like last weekend, we had major rodeos, good weather. So it's possible that week could be big. And if you note, week 28 is when we started the weekends only. So this is just for informational purposes. This doesn't count against our quota. This is the federal landings to date, and that season actually closed on July 21st. It ran from June 1st to July 21st, and they harvested just shy of 118,000 pounds. Okay, so we're talking about effort and how last weekend we had big rodeos, good weather. This is 2018 effort in offshore trips compared to 2017 and the 2015 to 17 average. And I'll note 2017 was low in effort as a year to begin with. And you'll notice with 2018, we've had week 24, 25, and 29 have been really low. So that's just another thing to think about. If we get another big week, we could be looking at getting very close. So our famous projection slide, and I'm going to caution you, as I always do, that it is merely a projection. And if we actually took all the projections I've presented to you over the last few months, you'd probably get a spaghetti plot just like you see on the Weather Channel. But currently, this is where it projects using those 3-day weekends. And the next slide will be a table so you can see the dates that equates to. So here's that table. Currently, that puts us in the week of August 27th. I put in the 7-day just for comparison if we were still going that way. Just to give you an idea, we're running about 2 weekends ahead of where we would be according to these projections. Once again, like it says there, we can't account for that weather or angler behavior. So anything's possible. It is just a projection. But that is where we stand, and I'll take any questions if you have.
Might as well jump off at it. I find it interesting that in 3 days we have the capacity to harvest 95,000 pounds of fish. And I appreciate Secretary Montase and Assistant Secretary Banks and your staff for putting together that percentage effort. And as we talked at the end of the season, I sure would like to see that Monday through Thursday, if you can quantify total pounds. I know you can't do it by week, but maybe by that segment, just to know how much was actually caught Monday through Thursday, because it sure seems obvious that folks in Louisiana like to fish on Fridays and Saturdays. And then obviously weather last weekend was spectacular, snapper fishing weather. And so I'm expecting a pretty sizable amount, but the weekend before was terrible. So I agree, but I think we really are going to have to almost look at weather and try and rub you guys crystal balls to see, to make these guesstimates, because it's going to be a challenge to get close and stay below. And I think everybody should keep that in mind. And if we stop a little bit shorter than what everybody would like, they're just going to have to accept that, because there's no magic silver bullet, no crystal ball, and I don't think y'all have a tarot card reader or a psychic on staff that I know of, but I appreciate you guys' efforts and what you've been doing. The other thing I'll say, which is disappointing, and we have an upcoming Gulf Council meeting, and I alluded to it earlier, it sure seems like there's a tendency for NOAA and NIMS to want to move federally permitted charter boats out of the state plans. But this 117,000 pounds that our group caught, if I'm not mistaken, we were closer, our historical catch is closer to 300,000 pounds. Is that
So what we asked for in the EFP was about 320,000 pounds. NOAA came up with some other figures that were less than that, but this is what.
Either number, our guys sure seem to be coming out in a very unfavorable scenario by remaining managed by the federal system. I remember in that discussion about the EFP, and I want to thank the department again for your efforts to try and keep them in there, even though we were unsuccessful. But I heard a lot of folks talking about fair and equitable. And I'll say this, at least in my opinion, I'm having trouble seeing what's fair and equitable about our Louisiana federally permitted charter fleet only being allowed to harvest 117,000 pounds during that federal framework. So I know a lot of folks that were complaining about Louisiana's approach were from other states, and they were using that fair and equitable argument. This sure doesn't look overly fair and overly equitable to our Louisiana federally permitted charter fleet. With that, I want to thank the department. I want to thank the enablers of LA Creel and all the folks who participated on it, because you guys are doing an outstanding job.
I just wanted to mention, I popped a slide up here. This is up to date.
That's the one I like.
Percentages by weekday.
At some point, can you guys share that with us? Probably just wait till the end, when it's all over and done with. I've got a lot of free time apparently on my hands. I like to look at that stuff.
You must have more than I do. Or you use yours more wisely.
Have a public comment, Mr. Richard Fisher, Louisiana Charter Boat Association.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Richard Fisher, East William David Parkway in Metairie. Commissioner Corbill stole a lot of my thunder of what I was going to say, so appreciate that. Thank you very much. And yeah, we hear a lot about fair and equitable from the other states when it comes to red snapper, but it's not so fair and equitable that in the Eastern Gulf they can take 2 and 3 trips a day. And here in Louisiana, we're not able to do that. We've got to go out much longer. We've got other weather concerns that are, of course, exacerbated by having to go out much longer, further out in the Gulf than they do in some other states. We don't have the accidental tourist customer base, as I like to call it, that they have out in the Eastern Gulf here in Louisiana. So there's a lot of ways that it's not fair and equitable. And as I was just talking about, 118,000, that's less than half of what I think we all here agree would be the unfairly low amount that the rest of the Gulf Council wanted to ram down our throats had we been in the EFP. Didn't make it into the EFP, but it would have still been a pretty good number considering we didn't even reach half of that. And it's just more than a third of what we believe we deserve in Louisiana, which is about 11% of the Gulf's historical average. So just really wanted to come up here and stress the importance to Assistant Secretary Banks sitting on the council, as well as any other council members who may be listening, to say, we really need Louisiana's federally permitted charter boats in the state management plan for Louisiana. And I think the proof is in the pudding based off of the amount that we were only allowed to catch in this year based off of the situation that we're forced into. So thank you all for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Agent. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is to set the December 2018 commission date, meeting date. Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. We have to meet prior to the 10th of each month, correct, Ms. Martin? Okay.
Any ideas?
Well, I think the 6th is in the split, but I'll be dealing with Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck then, so y'all will have the pleasure of not having me up here.
I move forward to be on the 6th.
I'll second that.
Wait a minute, I thought you've never missed a meeting.
I haven't. That'll be the first one.
We can't change it?
And location? Any ideas on location?
I'd seen an email from Commissioner Sinceri. I'm open to it being anywhere.
Two spots that I mentioned to you guys, one being in Homa and one being at Rockefeller. So, it's really up to the commission. It's just to have it outside of the city of Baton Rouge a couple of times a year, as to stay with what the group has wanted to do. It's up to you guys.
Any poison, it's okay for me.
No one
Anybody wants to do
No one
homeless?
wants.
We could also do a satellite meeting in November. We got a little bit of time to talk about it. I mean, as long as I think we give it at least a month or maybe 2 months notice, we can pick up our second satellite meeting. Maybe everybody think about it and talk about it next meeting.
That could be fun.
I'll add this, I don't want to burst anyone's bubble that was just enraged with, or filled with excitement. I might not be leaving till Wednesday, so.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to volunteer a location. Our new Lafayette building would be an ideal location for a commission meeting.
Do Lafayette in December?
That'd be nice.
Sure.
That'd be good.
Sure.
Let's do, and then maybe think about doing, do Rockefeller in January.
We can make that decision next.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't mind going to a day trip later to see that. How far is it from Lafayette?
I'm just about out of Boudin anyway, so that'd be great to be.
Okay.
Y'all want to do Lafayette? Lafayette. One thing I did enjoy today, and it was nice to see, was all these fishermen coming. I like the idea of setting the shrimp seasons in southeast Louisiana, but it may end August, maybe in the future.
Hey, we got shrimp in Southwest over there, Bob?
It's not quite as much. Not quite as much.
We don't have as much,
but
I agree.
All right, I move that the meeting is in Lafayette in December on the 6th.
Correct.
a motion, is that a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
I'll accept public comments. Anybody have any public comments?
Mr. Chairman, can I just have a second?
Yes, sir.
I want to compliment our enforcement division for the outstanding job they did with the funeral for the cadet. I got to tell you, after meeting the family and talking to all of his friends, we are certainly going to lose out by losing this cadet. He would have been an awesome asset to us. And Wildlife and Fisheries, certainly the enforcement division did an awesome job sending him off and certainly working with the family. And I want to tell them thank you publicly.
Thank you, sir. Any more public comments? Yes, sir. State your name and address for the record.
My name is Nicky Alfonso. I'm from St. Bernard, Louisiana. Commercial fisherman. I've did it all already. There's a couple things that y'all was talking about that y'all might have missed, that maybe I didn't understand or y'all missed. When y'all said about 50 sacks, 2-day limit, has to have a cooler, what tag system are y'all gonna go off of? Because the tag system means a lot too.
Who would answer that? Patrick?
I'm gonna do my best here and try to understand what you're asking. So what we're saying is if you're gonna stay out multiple days, you have to follow the DHH rules and regulations, which are, time temperature matrix. So you're gonna have those oysters under refrigeration within that time temperature matrix. But we're also imposing within our DE, in order to allow you to have a 2-day possession limit, we're requiring that you properly tag those oysters before the end of that day. Part of the laws say that you have to tag the oysters prior to leaving the harvest area. That's part of the DHH rules. But we recognize that, at least on the public grounds, you may end up harvesting in this spot right now all day long and staying right there, only to harvest the next day. So you wouldn't technically be leaving that harvest area. But in order to properly enforce the possession limit, we need to have those oysters tagged at the end of that day. So those regular tags that you would have, you'd have to fill out your log book, your DHH log book, by the end of that day, just like normal. And all that would have to be in order prior to the end of the day. And that's where we're going with that. Enforcement bent a lot this year to allow a 2-day possession limit, but they needed certain things in order to do that. And one was to make sure that those oysters from day one were tagged at the end of the day so that there was no question as to whether you've harvested 50 sacks in one day or not.
Right. Well, I've done that this year. This is the first year I've used the cooler on my boat. And it's in 1 hour after May 1st, 1 hour, they have to go in the cooler, tag the whole thing. But I didn't hear nothing about a tag system when y'all discussed it. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, what we're talking about is the regular harvest tag that you put on each sack.
Okay.
And again, current law is that when oysters have to be tagged when you leave the harvest area. But in a case like what we're contemplating, you might be in that same harvest area for 2 days.
Right.
And so by that law, you technically would not have to tag those oysters until day 2 when you went home. But in order for them to properly enforce the possession limit, we've got to have you tag those day 1 oysters at the end of day 1.
No, I understand that part, but after May 1st on, when you got the hot parts of the month, an in-state oyster could be tagged with a green tag, right? And an out-of-state oyster going out of state has to be a white tag, right? Am I correct?
A green tag is
shucking?
Is shucking, right.
Okay, so what is going out of state? We can't go out of state according to the color of the tag system.
A pink tag gives you 5 hours if that oyster is staying in state.
Gotcha.
A white tag for everything else, and during the hot months, is 1 hour. And then a green tag, I can't remember the time there. Sorry, I'm going way back into my brain.
We'll learn more about this as it comes about.
Yeah, but so whatever the proper tag you would use for that day has to be used, and it has to be on that sack by the end of the day.
Okay. Because.
And just like any other time, you'll have to declare, probably on your harvest sheet when you start.
Right.
What you're going to be doing.
Right. I'd like to also say that the gentleman that did the shrimp survey stuff up there, that was awesome. This is the first meeting I've ever come to as far as this, and I've been a commercial fisherman all my life. But I thought that was awesome because it stated a lot of things. The only thing I'd like to see different stated is what's offshore and what's inshore, because that was your controversy in this room. Because some places didn't have brownies inshore, they had brownies offshore. Some places had brownies inshore that when they flooded the market with these little bitty brownies, that made the crowd mad because then they couldn't work for 8 to 10 days. So that'll play a little part in this, and that'll help them understand more about it. And the lady with the oyster stuff, I thought that was awesome too. But the only difference in that, y'all, Calcasieu Place, okay? And I fully understand trying to make this resource last because that's what we want. We want to bring this down to our kids, our grandkids, everything. But the whole thing about Calcasieu Lake being it's one item on its own, the science of it, and that's what makes the commercial fisherman, is nobody stated how fast them oysters grow a year to know how you can recover from a freshwater overflow. So in Calcasieu, how fast does oysters grow per year? Even by us, some areas are 2.5 years is harvestable. Some areas is 5 years is harvestable. But Calcasieu Lake is a lake on its own. So I just wanted to bring that up. It's all ideas.
Thank you.
But I think they did an awesome job.
Thank you, sir. Any more public comment? Right now, I will accept the motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion to adjourn. All approved? Yes.